Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku. Back with another fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Met the Girl Who Erased Reality. Now before starting, please give this video a like. And subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Chapter 1. The Girl in the Glass Room. The first thing she ever remembered was cold. Not the kind of cold that came with snow, but a sharp, metallic chill that bit into her skin and sank into her bones until even her breath felt hollow. She did not know how long she had been there. Time did not move in the lab. There were no windows or clocks, only the constant hum of machinery and the lingering antiseptic tang that never quite left the air. The walls were white, but not the clean kind of white. They had the yellowed shade of things that had seen too much: failed experiments, long nights, loss. The floor was often damp, sometimes with water, sometimes with unidentified residues. Inside a reinforced glass room, a girl no older than 5 sat curled in the corner, hugging her knees. Her hair was tangled and uneven as if cut with blunt scissors, and the hospital gown hung too loose for her small frame. The tag on her wrist read Subject 09 Null Genesis. They did not call her by name. She did not have one. A scientist reported through the intercom that the pulse rate was stable and ordered the activation sequence to begin. The lights flickered. Machines started to whir. YN's heart quickened. She knew what came next. Electrodes attached to her skin buzzed faintly and then stung as they synchronized with her pulse. Her vision blurred as a familiar black mist seeped from her chest, weightless and alive like shadows of static. The mist spread slowly, curling through the air like smoke before everything around her began to fade. The tray of metal instruments beside her dissolved into nothing. The edges of the room distorted and sound flattened until only silence remained. Alarms began to wail and the scientists behind the safety glass shouted frantic orders to contain the phenomenon, to stop the pulse, warning that the field was destabilizing. The little girl on the floor trembled, clutching her head. She wanted to stop it, she always wanted to stop it, but the power would not listen. It never had. The world around her shook, then fell disastrously silent. One scientist who had entered without protection froze mid-step. His outline shimmered and then seemed to disintegrate into particles that drifted away. He did not appear dead so much as gone. Hours later she woke in restraints again. Her pulse was weak and the edges of her vision were washed with white. Her fingers trembled when she reached for the air and found the cold metal cuffs locked around her wrists. A man in a black coat stood watching her from the other side of the glass. He praised her performance and addressed her as subject. He was different from the others, too calm, smiling in a way that never reached his eyes. The staff called him Dr. Kurigane. He leaned closer and observed that she was learning control. He said she would become perfect, that the world would be bent back to zero. His hand pressed against the glass above her head as he spoke of erasing the age of heroes and the man who had stolen their future. When he mentioned erasure, his eyes glittered with something that felt like intent. Sometimes they gave her objects to test her restraint: a small wooden cube, a rubber ball. Once they brought in a stray cat, and she cried for hours afterward. After that, they stopped bringing living things. The scientists around her murmured in whispers. Some were afraid, some fascinated, but none of them saw a child. To them she was an equation, a failed experiment that still functioned, a weapon waiting to be perfected. Each day repeated itself: blood tests, shock therapy, forced activations. Her body grew weaker with every trial, even as the anomaly within her strengthened. Sometimes, when her power activated, an empty space formed and she thought she heard voices in the void, whispers, please, echoes of what had been erased. When she tried to listen, the voices would swell into screams, and she would black out again. One night, when everything felt too heavy to keep her eyes open, she whispered to herself whether she was real. Only the cameras blinked their red lights back at her. She did not know her real name. The scientists had never given her one. The only pre-lab memory was a fleeting warmth and a woman's lullaby hummed in the dark, a memory that might have been real or a construct her mind had created to survive. On day 1421, the test log recorded that Subject 09's pulse synchronization had improved by 4% and that the quirk reacted more efficiently to emotional triggers, according to Dr. Kurigane. Other scientists noted that her consciousness had drifted and the null field had nearly reached the containment walls. Dr. Kurigane marked the progress as evidence of adaptation to suppression and predicted that soon she would not resist. When another researcher expressed concern over continued instability, Dr. Kurigane acknowledged the risk that she might unmake herself but insisted that survival would make her a key asset. The next morning she was colder than usual. Her fingers ached and her heartbeat felt uneven, each breath like static. The air around her pulsed faintly, small ripples running through the glass as if reality itself were unsettled. Then metal crashed. Gunfire and screams broke the silent routine. Alarms flashed crimson through the corridors. Scientists shouted that heroes had located the facility and ordered evacuation of the lower lab. The glass room door burst open. A scientist reached for her arm, but a scarf lashed through the chaos and wrapped around his wrist, yanking him backward in a swift, decisive motion. Aizawa stepped out of the smoke, hair loose and eyes rimmed with a faint glow from the emergency lights. He moved with calm, focused fury and warned the others not to touch her. She stared at him, the first person who did not wear a mask or a lab coat. He looked unmistakably real. She did not move, she did not trust rescues. People did not come for her out of kindness. People came for what she was. Aizawa reassured her that she was safe and then acted. He moved like a shadow through the ruined corridor, neutralizing the remaining scientists with quick, controlled restraints before they could reach her. As the alarm lights flickered and the sounds of the facility cut off behind them, a voice in the burning lab shouted a warning that she could not be erased and that she would destroy him too. Aizawa did not reply. He tightened his grip and kept moving. He knelt and placed a warm hand on her shoulder. She flinched at the unfamiliar comfort. He asked if she could walk, and when she shook her head weakly, he lifted her carefully, handling her as though she were something fragile rather than a threat. They moved through the ruined hallways and out into the night. Under a quiet sky for the first time in her life, she looked up and saw stars, small, steady lights that did not flicker like alarms or monitors and that did not vanish when she blinked. In that moment a revelation settled in her chest, both terrifying and beautiful. She existed. Not merely as Subject 09 or a weapon, but as someone real, someone Aizawa would one day regard as family. Chapter 2, Little Shadows. The first time she felt sunlight on her face she cried. Not from fear or pain, but from being overwhelmed. The light was warm and golden and her eyes did not know where to rest. She pressed her tiny palms to the ambulance window and felt the sunlight spill through her fingers like warmth. Aizawa stood quietly beside the medic as the vehicle moved. She was silent most of the time, making only small sounds, hiccups and little gasps as if her voice were still learning how to exist in open air. She was only 4, but she did not behave like other children. Her gaze was unnervingly calm and strangely calculating. When people spoke to her, she only tilted her head, as if listening to a language she had not learned. When they arrived at the hospital, she froze. White walls, machines, mess. Her pulse spiked again. The lights in the hallway flickered faintly, and the heart monitor beside her crackled with static. Aizawa stepped forward immediately, holding up a hand to stop the doctors and warning them not to make any sudden moves because she did not trust this kind of place. He crouched by her bed and lowered his voice, telling her she was safe and that there would be no more tests or cages. Her small hands gripped the edge of the blanket. She did not understand all his words, but she understood his calm tone, soft, not sharp or demanding. She blinked up at him and asked faintly whether he did not hurt. Aizawa answered that he did not hurt. Something in her shoulders loosened. For the first time, she did not flinch when someone reached for her. Life after the lab. Aizawa was not ready to raise a child. He barely knew how to take care of himself, and now there was a little girl who woke up screaming in the middle of the night and refused to eat anything that was not sealed or checked twice. So he tried. He let her sleep in the smallest room of his apartment, a quiet space with pale curtains and a soft futon. The first few nights she would not lie down. She just sat there with her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the window as if waiting for someone to drag her back. When he found her like that, he did not lecture or ask questions. He simply brought a blanket, sat beside her, and stayed. Sometimes she fell asleep mid-watch, head lolling onto his arm, and he never moved until she woke. It took a week for her to start eating properly. It took 2 for her to say his name. One morning while he tied his hair back, she whispered his name, Aizawa, softly and unsurely. He turned, surprised, and told her she could call him that or Shoyuta if she wanted. She tried the name and then decided that Aizawa was better. He chuckled, barely a sound but real, and agreed that Aizawa it was. Learning to be small. Wyan did not know how to play. When other kids her age laughed at the park, she watched them with wide, blank eyes. When one little girl offered her a toy, she stared at it like an experiment waiting to start. Aizawa stood at a distance, scarf tucked loosely around his neck. Hizashi, known as Present Mike, leaned beside him with his hands in his pockets and observed that the kid did not talk much. Aizawa confirmed that she was barely speaking and that she was always watching. Hizashi teased that she reminded him of someone he knew, and Aizawa rolled his eyes without denying it. Yn eventually wandered back clutching the toy she had been given and held it up to Aizawa, frowning as she explained that they said it was for her. He assured her it was. When she asked why, he said it was because they wanted to share. She studied the toy as if trying to understand a complicated formula, then nodded solemnly and tucked it into her pocket as if it were precious. At night she drew on the walls, not with crayons but with chalk Aizawa had left on his desk circles, lines, and strange shapes that looked like stars falling into spirals. When he asked what they were, she told him they were the places that disappeared when she slept. He did not press for more. Later he quietly painted the walls a darker color so she would have a new space to draw on. Understanding the power. Her quirk did not stay dormant for long. One afternoon Aizawa found a coffee mug on the table gone, not broken, not moved, just gone. Yn sat on the floor trembling, eyes wide and terrified, and said that she had not meant to and that it had just vanished. He crouched down and calmly asked if she had felt anything before it happened. She described the sensation as the air growing heavy, like it had stopped breathing. Aizawa explained that when the air stopped she stopped too. Her quirk was tied to her heartbeat, and if she controlled that she could control the effect. She understood that if she did not manage it she could make things disappear, and he promised they would make sure she did not. That night they practiced breathing together, slow inhales, slow exhales until she learned to stay calm even when the air hummed around her. For the first time, her power did not hurt anything. Little things. Every day she learned something new. She learned that cats purr when they are happy, that hot soup can burn the tongue, that naps were safe, and that hugs awkward and strange at first did not mean pain. One morning she found Aizawa asleep at the table with papers scattered everywhere. She pulled a blanket over his shoulders and thanked him for being there, the first time she used those words. Sometimes she still dreamed of the lab and woke up crying quietly, whispering old commands like Subject 09, Containment Field, Reset. Aizawa would sit beside her bed and rest a hand gently on her head until she drifted back to sleep. He did not speak much, but she always knew he was there, and slowly that became enough. One evening she looked up at the sky, her favorite thing to stare at now, and asked why the stars were so small. Aizawa explained that they were not small, just far away, and she wondered if she would be big someday. He ruffled her hair and said she would be big and strong, maybe even a hero, and when she asked if she would be like him he paused and then smiled faintly and said hopefully better. That night Yn wrote her name for the first time in a notebook he had given her. The letters were uneven and shaky, but they belonged to her. Under it she wrote Yn Aizawa, not subject chapter 3, before the bells of UA. Summer, 1 month before the UA entrance exams. The hum of computer servers filled the faculty lounge, low, rhythmic, constant. Yn sat cross-legged on the couch, her posture too calm for someone rewriting UA's security system in real time. The soft blue light from the monitor flickered across her tired eyes. Aizawa leaned against the doorway with his scarf draped lazily around his neck and remarked that she was not supposed to be inside the mainframe. Yn replied without looking up that she was not, that she was simply cleaning the back doors Nizu pretended not to know about. Aizawa stared at her for a long second and observed that Nizu was probably watching her do it right now. Yn muttered that he should thank her later. It was not defiance, not exactly. Her voice was her usual tone, calm, factual, and mildly unimpressed. Aizawa sighed, dragging a hand through his messy hair, and told her that she had picked up his habits. She asked if they were bad ones, glancing up with half-lidded eyes. He listed the sleeping schedule, the attitude, the sarcasm. She corrected him softly that those were survival skills. He did not argue. She had grown up like this, not normal, but stable. There were no classrooms full of noise, no crowds. Lessons occurred in quiet rooms, with the smell of coffee and the occasional shouting match between present Mike and Midnight echoing through the teacher's lounge. She had been homeschooled under their care, math and science from Nizu, strategy from Aizawa, public communication reluctantly from Mike. She was their collective responsibility, their secret student. In return, she helped in ways none of them expected. By 15, YN had become a strange combination of calm and brilliance, cold efficiency mixed with a sharp intuition that unnerved even Nizu at times. She understood UA's systems better than some of its engineers. The irony was not lost on anyone. The child once kept in a lab now helped safeguard one of the world's most advanced hero academies. Training Ground Beta. Afternoon sunlight shimmered on the steel floor as YN stood in front of a combat drone. Her eyes flicked between the display on her tablet and the machine as it powered up. Present Mike called from the sidelines and asked if she was sure it was not going to blow up again. She replied coolly that, statistically, that had been his fault. Mike protested dramatically that Aizawa's influence had gotten her to adopt his attitude. Aizawa folded his arms and pointed out that she had results, which Mike did not. When the drone suddenly stopped mid-motion and every circuit froze, a soft hum vibrated in the air. YN narrowed her gaze and activated her quirk just enough to neutralize the power around it. The machine clicked and rebooted, perfectly stable. She stepped back and noted that the overload had been neutralized. All Might watched from behind and praised her, saying she had used her quirk with surgical precision. YN tilted her head and admitted that it was not perfect yet. All Might warmly observed that she had grown remarkably. She looked away and reflected that growth was inevitable when one was no longer chained to a lab table. Aizawa quietly placed a hand on her shoulder, and she did not flinch. Despite her stoic nature, the teachers had learned how to read her silence. When she sat at the table during lunch, quietly reading while the others talked, it was not disinterest but comfort. She liked being near them, even if she rarely said so. When Mike made bad jokes, she hid a small smile behind her mug. When Aizawa passed out paperwork for her lessons, she rolled her eyes but still completed it early. She had become a quiet part of their world, and Aizawa's world. That peace lasted until the morning Nizu called her to his office. A neat white envelope sat on the desk. UA entrance exam invitation special recommendation. She did not touch it, only stared. She asked Aizawa if he had known. He said Nizu had told him and that he had wanted her to focus on her studies before thinking about it. He admitted that he also had not wanted her to argue. She exhaled quietly, almost laughing, and wondered aloud whether he really thought she belonged in a school full of loud, overconfident teenagers. Aizawa told her that she belonged wherever she decided to stand and noted that she had already surpassed many professionals in analysis and control. She muttered that he was biased. He countered that he was accurate. That night, YN sat by the window with city lights reflecting in her eyes. The air was warm and soft, the kind of summer night that hummed with quiet life. Her fingers traced the edge of the recommendation letter, though she did not open it again. She already knew what it said and she already knew her answer. She whispered that tomorrow she would begin existing as something other than an experiment. She turned off the lamp, leaving only the faint glow of moonlight and the soft rustle of Aizawa's cat hopping onto her bed. She did not move the cat. It was quiet and peaceful, a life she had built herself in silence, under the care of a man who had taught her that strength did not need to shout to be real. Chapter 4. The Entrance Exam. The morning sun spilled gold over Mizudafu, glinting off UA High's massive gates, a symbol of hope for hundreds of aspiring heroes. Excitement buzzed through the crowd of students gathering in front of it, the air thick with nerves and chatter. Amid the sea of energy and laughter, one girl stood utterly still, YN Aizawa. She wore a simple black training outfit and running shoes, hair tied loosely with stray strands brushing her cheeks in the wind. There was no visible excitement, only a calm that felt out of place in such a crowd. Her half-lidded eyes scanned the students, quiet and observant, each movement deliberate. She had no friends with her, no parents cheering from afar. Her bag was slung over one shoulder and the indifference she wore made her seem more ghost than human. Her gaze lingered on the UA gates, and she let out a faint sigh at the thought of beginnings. Present Mick's voice boomed over the field, instructing candidates to proceed to their assigned areas. YN winced slightly at the volume and muttered that it was loud. A nervous green-haired boy beside her turned, his eyes wide, and apologized when she had not responded. She walked away before he could say more. High above the exam field in the observation room, UA teachers and staff stood before a wall of glowing monitors, each showing a different angle of the battlefield. Aizawa leaned against the glass, his tired eyes fixed on the feed showing his daughter's area, and asked flatly if they were really letting her participate. Nizu, perched on his platform, answered that of course she was. She had insisted. Aizawa repeated that insisting was new. All Might laughed softly and told Aizawa he should be proud that she was taking her own step forward. Aizawa replied that he would be proud if she did not erase the entire testing zone. Nizu cheerfully explained that they had reinforced the area with spatial anchors and regeneration layers just in case. Aizawa pointed out that the explanation was not reassuring. The metallic gates in the exam arena groaned open as sunlight cut through steel corridors and students stepped into a massive mock city designed to simulate chaos. Skyscrapers and cracked roads cast long shadows, creating the perfect environment for training scenarios. Present mixed signal hit and chaos erupted instantly. Flames erupted into the sky and sheets of ice spread across the pavement, turning the mock city into a dynamic sparring ground. Quirks of every shape and color collided as examinees shouted, fought, and scrambled for points. In the middle of it all, YN walked unhurried, unbothered, unshaken. Dust swirled around her ankles as she surveyed the scene like someone watching a documentary. A two-pointer bot charged straight toward her, clearing obstacles in a dramatic motion. The ground shook. Most examinees screamed or bolted. YN did not. She raised her hands slowly, pupils shimmering faint silver, and the air twisted like heat rising off asphalt. Then silence. The robot vanished, not destroyed but simply gone. The ground where it had stood was smooth and untouched. Nearby students froze. One asked what had happened, another wondered if she had vaporized it, and a third noted there was no blast and nothing remained. YN stared at the empty space with her hands still hovering and murmured that it was overkill and that she would dial it back. She moved forward, ignoring the stares. In the observation room, Present Mick's mouth hung open as he announced that she had deleted a two-pointer. Nizu clasped his paws and called it fascinating, noting no debris, no radiation, a perfect null state. All Might voiced both awe and concern and asked whether it was safe. Aizawa replied that safety depended on who was using it. Midnight leaned in, uneasy, and commented that YN was terrifyingly composed and showed no hesitation. Nizu teased that she learned that from Aizawa. Aizawa said nothing further, his jaw tightened slightly. On the screen his daughter continued forward, calm and unreadable like a blade honed to silence. Back in the field, YN slipped through the chaos with surgical precision. Robots lunged and collided around her, but none reached her, each threat that approached vanished. No sparks, no metal, just absence. She moved through the battlefield taking mental notes about a three-pointer to the northeast with a predictable hydraulic movement pattern, flicked her wrist, and the machine's chest flickered out of existence while the rest of its frame collapsed without scattering debris. Another approached and, with a faint shimmer, disappeared as well. She was not fighting so much as analyzing the mechanics of the battle. Beneath her calm, her breathing shortened. The familiar sting behind her eyes signaled her quirk strain. Still, she pressed on. Across the mock city, two examinees struggled beneath a slab of collapsed concrete and shouted for help. YN appeared beside them without a sound. They froze at her expressionless face and empty gray eyes. YN instructed them to stay still, placed her hand on the concrete, and her fingertips pulsed faintly. The structure shimmered and then ceased to be, leaving no dust. The students crawled free and expressed their gratitude. YN warned them that a three-pointer was behind them. They turned just in time to see her raise her hand and erase the threat. When one of them asked about her quirk, she muttered that it was complicated and then walked away, swallowed by smoke and chaos. In the observation room, All Might leaned forward in astonishment and noted that she did not seem to be breathing hard. Aizawa pointed out that she was straining and asked the others to watch her pupils. Nizu explained that the Null Genesis quirk drew on both her energy and her perception of existence, and that the more she interacted with the field, the more her mind risked fracturing under paradox. Midnight asked what he meant by paradox. Nizu said that the human brain was not meant to decide what exists and what does not, and that contradictions could cause pain. Aizawa tightened his grip on his scarf. With 1 minute remaining, the announcement echoed through the ruined city. Smoke curled into the air and most students were covered in grime and exhaustion. YN stood alone amid the silence, the air shimmering faintly around her fingers as she flexed. Her head throbbed and the edges of her vision flickered. She murmured that it was time to stop and that she was near her threshold. Then the ground shook and a shadow fell across the arena. The towering zero-pointer advanced, its massive frame grinding against the pavement as it moved. Panicked screams filled the air as students scattered. YN did not move. The air around her stilled against the roar of chaos. Her heartbeat slowed and her hand rose. The light in her eyes deepened and the world blurred as she focused. Every sound stretched thin and every particle seemed to freeze. The zero-pointer's massive foot hung above the ground and then it was gone, simply vanished. The shadow lifted and clear sky returned, leaving stunned silence. No debris fell and not even wind moved. Every student stopped running and every teacher in the control room went silent. Present Mick's voice cracked as he reported that she had deleted the zero-pointer. Midnight clutched her chair and said it should not be possible. All Might stared and observed that even powerful villains had not achieved that. Nizu grinned and described her ability as resetting things to a point before existence rather than destroying them. Aizawa said his main worry was that she remained conscious through it all. On the screen, YN stood amid absolute stillness, sunlight washing over her expressionless face and making her look like a calm figure in a world that had briefly ceased to be. When the final buzzer rang, most students collapsed where they stood and medbots moved across the field to tend minor injuries. YN sat quietly on a bench with a bottle of water in her hand. Her fingers trembled faintly from residual feedback, but her breathing was steady. She tilted her head up toward the clear sky and asked whether she had passed. Boots crunched as All Might approached, smiling though his eyes searched her face with curiosity and unease. He told her that it had been quite the display and that she had effectively broken their scoring system because the machines could not register what had happened. YN explained that the obstacles had not truly occurred in the way the program registered. She had removed them from the field before the system recognized their destruction. All Might brushed it off as semantics. YN replied that reality did not care about semantics and then asked softly whether that was enough to be a hero. All Might looked down at her, the girl who had erased the largest obstacle like dust, and found no arrogance, only quiet uncertainty. He said that being a hero was not about how strong a power was but about what one did with it. YN lowered her eyes and said that perhaps she would learn. She stood, brushed off her skirt, and suggested that Nizu adjust the exam scoring because it was inefficient. All Might laughed and remarked that she really was Aizawa's child. YN blinked once. She had been told worse, she said, then walked away unhurried and calm, as if the world she had erased no longer mattered. Observation tower later. Aizawa stood alone watching the now empty field as the sun dipped low, casting gold across the ruined mock city. Nizu joined him quietly, sipping tea, and the principal remarked that Aizawa looked worried. Aizawa replied that he always was. Nizu called the girl remarkable, and Aizawa countered that she was dangerous. Nizu observed that sometimes those were the same thing. Aizawa did not answer at first. His eyes softened just a little, and he conceded that she had done well today. Nizu asked if he had told her, and Aizawa admitted he had not. Nizu smiled and pointed out that Aizawa would have his chance soon, since she would be in Class 1A. Aizawa froze and asked if Nizu was putting her in his class. Nizu said that no one was better suited to handle her than the man who had taught her everything. Aizawa groaned, dragging a hand down his face, and Nizu suggested he think of it as character development. Aizawa muttered something unintelligible, but when the monitors replayed her erasing the zero-pointer, his lips twitched into the barest hint of a smile. Chapter 5. First day at UA. The morning haze. The sun rose lazily over Mizudafu, softened by a thin veil of clouds. Anticipation burned inside UA High as students hurried through the gates, laughter and nerves colliding in the air. Among them walked and Aizawa, silent, steady, and out of place. Her uniform hung a little loosely and her tie was barely knotted. Strands of hair brushed her face as she looked up at the towering building that already knew her name. There was no awe in her expression, only quiet understanding. She had seen higher walls, harsher lights, and colder people. UA felt like freedom and also like a stage she had never asked to stand on. She walked on with a light bag, a notebook, a bento Aizawa had left on the counter, and a mechanical pencil she had fixed herself, but her mind was heavy with memories of sterile labs, whispered commands, and numbers etched on her wrist like ghosts of a past she could not forget. The door to Class 1A slid open with a mechanical click and dozens of heads turned. A boy with a tail whispered that she was early, and another student asked who she was. YN did not answer. She crossed the room and sat near the window, taking the same spot her adoptive father had preferred during staff meetings. The sunlight caught faint shadows under her eyes, proof she had been awake since dawn, reading the UA handbook for the 5th time. Katsuki Bakugo entered next, confidence practically radiating from him. He paused at sight of her and demanded to know who she was. YN responded that she was just someone, flatly. The remark was not rude so much as factual, and it drew a few snickers. Eijiro Kirishima admired how she had not flinched, and Denki Kaminari grinned that she gave off a don't mess with me vibe that was both scary and oddly appealing. Hanta Siro elbowed Kaminari to be quiet. YN ignored the chatter and opened her notebook, observing faces and movements as if cataloging data before deciding how to act. Shoto Todoroki watched her in silence, the morning light reflecting in his mismatched eyes. Her composure felt familiar, like a mirror that refused to answer. The classroom filled with voices, greetings, jokes, and the loud clamor of a new beginning, and YN remained still, listening. She winced at the noise and murmured that it was loud, then returned to her book until Aizawa entered, revealing the sleeping bag she knew by heart. He addressed the class and told them to find buddies elsewhere if they intended to hunt for them, punctuating the point by taking a sip from a juice box and emerging from his cocoon. The room quieted in 8 seconds. YN snapped back to the present when Aizawa produced a P uniform and instructed everyone to wear it and head to the training grounds. She stood first, taking the uniform and leaving the classroom, and Aizawa told the rest to grab theirs from the lockers. The students reacted dramatically when Aizawa announced a quirk apprehension test. YN rubbed her ears and moved toward quieter classmates. She nodded hello to them, and they returned the gesture. She tuned out most of her adoptive father's announcements until he called her name and asked her to step forward. Heads turned. Mina Ashido blurted that YN was Aizawa's child, and Kaminari murmured that the calm face explained a lot. Bakugo scowled at the idea of someone taking first place. YN ignored the whispers and stepped forward with steady, almost bored movements and eyes half-lidded, as if the whole scene were routine. Aizawa reached into his scarf and pulled out a softball, tossing it lazily toward her. He reminded her that she had done this in middle school without her quirk. YN said that she had been homeschooled but had practiced privately with Hisashi. The class buzzed with rumors about her quirk. Some said it was strange and unknown. Bakugo dismissed the fuss and anticipated an interesting show. YN rolled the ball in her palm and asked whether she could throw it anywhere. Aizawa indicated that she could go as far as she could. She stepped into the chalked circle. The air felt still and charged. With no dramatic wind-up, just a small, almost lazy flick of her wrist, the ball flew up, spinning smoothly through the clear sky, and then it vanished without a trace. There was no trail, no explosion, only a faint shimmer where the ball had been, and then nothing. Students froze mid-breath. Mina exclaimed in disbelief. Shiro wondered if the ball had teleported. Midoriya flipped open his notebook and noted frantically that it was not destruction but erasure. The room hummed with shocked, speculative energy as everyone tried to process the quiet, uncanny demonstration. Aizawa glanced down at his measuring device. The digital reading blinked once, then locked on infinity. Gasps rose around the field. Someone uttered a curse. Even Bakugo looked thrown. Kaminari whispered that she had deleted the ball. YN lowered her arm, expression neutral, her eyes glowing a faint ash gray. Aizawa said that was enough. YN murmured to herself that it had not been destroyed, only no longer there. Aizawa looked at her for a long moment, a quiet, weighty look that was not pride. He noticed the tremor in her fingers before she tucked her hand into her pocket, the subtle drain her quirk left behind. Aizawa murmured that she would need to pace herself. YN replied that she always did, their eyes meeting for half a heartbeat. It was not affection, but it was trust unspoken and steady. Behind them, the class was still reeling. Kaminari said in awe and terror that she had blinked it out of existence. Kirishima grinned and punched his fist into his palm, declaring that it was so manly. Mina laughed nervously and called it deletion of reality. Todoroki watched her with cool eyes. He noted that the way she carried herself quiet, precise, untouched by chaos drew his attention more than the power itself. When YN caught him staring, he looked away first. Aizawa pocketed the measuring device and addressed the rest of the class, saying that now they knew what they were up against and instructing everyone else to line up for the same test. Groans, nervous laughter, and muttered disbelief filled the field. YN stepped back beside the line, her face calm again though a faint fatigue edged her breathing. Kirishima whispered to Denki that she was like a mini Aizawa but scarier. Denki agreed that she was also kind of cool. Bakugo clicked his tongue and said she would not stay on top for long, though even he was not sure he believed it. Aizawa told the students that their freedom meant the department could dispense with students as it pleased and declared a new rule that the student who ranked last in total points would be judged hopeless and expelled. He warned them darkly about the seriousness of their training, and the students reacted as he began explaining the real work of a hero and the expectation to push themselves beyond limits. The sun climbed higher above the training field for the 50-meter dash. The air shimmered with heat. YN stood at the starting line, calm and detached. Denki Kaminari buzzed with nervous energy and joked that he had gotten lucky racing with the top scorer, adding that if he won she would owe him a date. YN asked what a date was with genuine confusion. Kirishima laughed and pointed out that she did not even know what that meant, and Denki groaned that it was unfair. Aizawa cut through the chatter and ordered less talking and more running, preparing to mark the start. YN rolled her shoulders, the faint shimmer of her quirk gathering at her feet like heat mirages. When Aizawa dropped his hand, YN vanished in a soft flare of light, the ground cracking faintly from a pressure shift. She reappeared at the finish line before most students could blink, hair fluttering and expression neutral. Denki stumbled across seconds later, breathless, and asked how she had done it. YN explained simply that she had bent the air to push herself forward and remarked that he had been slow. The class erupted into laughter, even Aizawa's lips twitched almost imperceptibly. YN tilted her head, unused to being watched or cheered. At the grip strength test, the class gathered around digital dynamometers. Kirishima declared the moment a test of manliness and produced a reading of 540 kilograms with his hardening. Shiro laughed and clapped. YN stood quietly, studying the grip device like a puzzle. Aizawa watched from his sleeping bag, eyes half closed but attentive. When it was YN's turn, Denki called her the top scorer and dared her to beat Kirishima. YN asked whether the device measured pressure or control. Aizawa muttered that she should just grip it, expecting something unusual. She obeyed and fingers curled around the handle. The air around her hand shimmered, condensing like a distortion in glass, and the device's casing groaned under invisible pressure. The screen flashed an error for exceeded capacity. The class froze. Denki whispered that she had broken it. Mina yelped in surprise. YN blinked at the ruined device and said softly that it had not been that strong, then set it back down. Kirishima stared in awe and called her effortlessly hardcore. From his sleeping bag, Aizawa sighed quietly, but the faintest glimmer of pride touched his tired eyes. He ordered the next student forward. YN stepped aside, calm, her fingers lingering in the air as if still feeling the invisible force around her palm. She did not realize that every eye in Class 1A was on her. For the standing long jump, the class gathered near the sandpit as Aizawa instructed no running starts and allowed the use of quirks. Kirishima jumped first and landed with a grin. Mina followed with a laugh. Denki tripped midair and fell into the sand, drawing snickers. YN stepped forward, quiet and unreadable. She crouched slightly, her hair brushing her cheeks as the air around her shimmered faintly. Chapter 7. Suspicion. A small pulse of energy rippled under her feet and she vanished from sight. She reappeared at the very edge of the sandpit, perfectly balanced, her jump silent but impossibly far. Denki shouted in disbelief that she had disappeared. Todoroki observed that it looked like compression. Bakugo scoffed, calling her a show-off. Turned to him with a flat expression and remarked that he was louder than her quirk. A few students snickered. Aizawa, still half buried in his sleeping bag, sighed but could not hide a faint smirk and muttered that they should move on to the next test. During a mid-test break, YN asked quietly if she could go to the restroom. Aizawa told her to make it quick and not to erase the plumbing, returning to his clipboard without looking up. The class snickered as she walked off, calm and hands in her pockets. When she returned a few minutes later, she noticed a giant silhouette behind a far training wall, a tuft of blonde hair and a massive hand gripping the edge. All Might was peeking like a cartoon spy. Their eyes met and All Might froze, his wide grin stiffening as he babbled that he was checking the structural integrity of the wall. YN observed that he was terrible at hiding. All Might laughed nervously and blamed his genes. YN noted dryly that his father hid better. She walked back to the others, leaving All Might quietly embarrassed while Aizawa muttered that he had warned him about spying. Aizawa called Midoriya Izuku up next. Midoriya swallowed hard and stepped to the line, looking terrified. YN slipped to the back of the group, arms folded and expression unreadable. She felt a faint tremor in the air and sensed pressure. Behind a nearby wall, All Might was still peeking, his shadow cast wide and unmistakable. YN muttered that he was terrible at this. Then a sudden boom erupted. A shockwave ripped through the air and the test ball shot skyward, vanishing into the clouds. Students stumbled back, shielding their faces. When the dust settled, Midoriya stood frozen, clutching his arm and wincing with obvious pain. YN narrowed her eyes. The burst had carried a surge of raw, unstable power overwhelming and destructive in nature, and it felt eerily familiar. All Might had not moved, but his shoulders were tense and a bead of sweat slipped down his temple as he muttered that Midoriya had finally done it. YN breathed out and judged the situation suspicious. Bakugo charged at Midoriya, demanding an explanation and hurling a harsh insult. YN reacted instantly, gripping Bakugo's collar while Aizawa activated his quirk to nullify Bakugo's explosions and complained about dry eyes. Bakugo barked for her to let go and she released him after a blink. When the last of the dust settled, everyone stood in a rough semicircle, sweaty, panting and dazed. Aizawa tapped his tablet and revealed the scoreboard. YN at the top, followed by Momo Yaoyorozu, Todoroki Shudo, Bakugo Katsuki, Ida Tenya, Tokoyami Fumikage, Shuji Mezu, Ojiro Mashireo, Kirishima Idru, and Ashido Mina, with the remaining slots unfilled. Aizawa admitted with a grin that the expulsion threat from earlier had been a ruse to pull out their best performances. The students erupted in protest at the deception until someone pointed out that he had expelled an entire group of younger students the previous year, which made several pause and glance at YN. Mina gasped that YN had beaten Todoroki and Bakugo. YN blinked slowly at the comment and said that she had not expected anything different. Kirishima praised her in admiration. Bakugo's jaw twitched and his hands sparked faintly, but one look at YN's calm, unreadable expression stopped him. It was not pity but indifference, and that stung. Todoroki regarded her with quiet curiosity and a hint of recognition in his gaze. Aizawa broke in with a monotone that they had done well and ordered those who barely passed to train harder. He issued a nurse's pass for Midoriya and dismissed the class. As students dispersed, YN remained, staring at the scoreboard like it was another data point to file away. Aizawa leaned in and, in a low tone meant only for her, noted that she had topped the class and that homeschooling had not been a waste of time. YN's lips curved into the closest thing to a smile she allowed and told him that he sounded proud. Aizawa groaned and zipped his sleeping bag up. Chapter 8. Heroics 101. The next morning, sunlight poured through the wide classroom windows of Class 1A. The atmosphere was relaxed for once. No explosions, no tests, no dangerous training robots, just desks, notebooks, and present Mic's booming energy. Present Mike announced loudly that the class was ready for a grammar lesson. YN sat near the window, chin resting on her hand, staring at her open textbook, and muttered to herself that his volume was difficult to process before noon. Todoroki, seated beside her, dryly remarked that it matched his quirk and personality. YN agreed that both were loud. From the back, Kaminari leaned forward and suggested to YN that she probably enjoyed the material because she was so smart. YN replied that enjoy was a strong word. Kirishima laughed and noted that even top students got bored sometimes. 30 minutes later, Present Mike declared that class was over and tossed his notes into the air. Aizawa, half buried in his sleeping bag by the door, told him to clean it up. Present Mike protested briefly but conceded. YN rose and collected her things neatly while the rest of the class hurried toward lunch. Mina called out to her. Mina teased that YN should come to the cafeteria and joked about eating in the shadows like her father. YN stared for a moment and clarified that he did not eat in the shadows, then added that he preferred dim lighting. Mina laughed and agreed that it was the same thing. UA's cafeteria was lively. The air smelled of warm rice and curry, and students from other departments filled every table. YN stood in line quietly, scanning the menu with the same seriousness she used when analyzing combat data. She chose the rice bowl and asked for no sauce. The chef, Lunch Rush, beamed and asked if plain rice was really enough. YN nodded and described it as efficient. At a nearby table, Kaminari and Kirishima waved her over and said they had saved a seat. YN hesitated briefly because social dynamics were still confusing to her, then sat. Denki leaned forward and praised her for her performance the day before, asking how she had managed it without breaking a sweat. YN ate calmly and explained that controlled breathing and efficient movement were her methods. Denki compared that to a workout tutorial, and Kirishima laughed, nearly choking on his food. Todoroki offered a quiet compliment on her performance. YN looked up, surprised, and thanked him. For a brief moment they shared a quiet understanding, two calm, focused minds acknowledging each other. Kaminari then asked if she wanted to hang out after class, suggesting milkshakes and calling it a date. YN asked what a date was, genuinely unsure. The table froze. Kirishima grinned in disbelief and asked if she was joking. YN tilted her head and asked if it was a type of food. Bakugo from the next table snorted, and Midoriya reacted nervously. YN, unfazed, said she was not interested in eating it. Kirishima and Kaminari laughed, and even Todoroki's mouth twitched a little. The whole of Class 1A buzzed with anticipation for their next lesson, which was led by All Might. YN sat at her desk, chin on her palm, half listening to Mina and Denki debate the day's training. Her notes from the previous class were neat and precise. Denki called out, asking who would win in a spar between him and Bakugo. YN replied that Denki would short-circuit in 2 seconds, eyes still on her notebook. Kirishima laughed and Bakugo agreed tersely that she was right. The door burst open with All Might's booming entrance and unmistakable smile. The class erupted in excitement as he welcomed the students and announced that they would be diving into Heroics 101 to learn what it meant to fight professionally. He activated compartments along the room, revealing neatly packed hero costumes. The class reacted with awe. YN found her name on a locker and opened it to find a sleek, form-fitting black suit with red accents, designed for agility and protection. The suit featured a high collar, a fitted torso with geometric red lines, long sleeves with red wristbands, reinforced panels that provided coverage and mobility, and flexible, Seamless material in the legs with utility pouches on the thighs for equipment. Mina peeked and said it looked like something from a sci-fi movie. YN ran her fingers over the fabric and noted that it was designed to withstand quirk null zones, mentioning that Aizawa had helped design it. Denki made a teasing comment about her closeness to the underground hero. YN reiterated that Aizawa was her adoptive father. Jairu scolded Denki for being an idiot and gave him a light smack. After changing into their costumes, the students gathered on the training field, the sun reflecting off their suits. All Might raised a hand dramatically and announced a battle training exercise, and the class surged with adrenaline. YN stood at the back, focused, glancing briefly at Bakugo and Midoriya. She felt the familiar pulse of her quirk beneath her skin and remembered Aizawa's advice that deciding when to erase and when to act would define the kind of hero she became. That quiet thrill in her chest felt like the beginning of something important. Steel doors closed with a resonant thud in the empty training block. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as the students preparing to play the role of villains readied themselves. Bakugo stood by a window, looking down at the mock city, his costume sharp and tense, sparks flickering from his palms. YN stood across the room with her uniform coat hanging loosely, tracing the map All Might had projected earlier. The air between them was taut. Bakugo broke the silence by testing how her erasing quirk would help in a fight like this, his tone more probing than hostile. YN did not look up, she observed the possible entry points. She told him that he was loud and that Midoriya would hear him before he saw him. Uraraka was the opposite, quiet and clever. Bakugo snorted and asserted that he had known that nerd since they were kids. YN met his glare and pointed out that he was not the same kid anymore. Something in her cold, precise tone made him pause. Bakugo clicked his tongue and looked away, asking what the plan was while mockingly calling her princess. She told him not to call her that and then drew a circle on the map, explaining that the intruders would enter through the main stairwell and that he should go high, loud, and direct to draw Midoriya's attention. He blinked at the suggestion that he should go loud and expected her to be the one sneaking around like her old man. She confirmed the idea. He would distract and she would flank so Midoriya's focus would split and he could not strategize and protect Uraraka at the same time. Bakugo grinned, teeth sharp, and compared her to their stoic former teacher. YN did not reply, but her eyes narrowed just a fraction, showing something quieter, almost human. He caught the flicker and for a second his grin faltered. He muttered that she should not slow him down and scratched the back of his neck as he turned away. She tilted her head and made it clear she was not planning to. A few minutes passed in silence. Bakugo checked his gauntlets while pacing near the window. YN sat on a broken crate, cross-legged, eyes closed in thought as the subtle shimmer of her quirk bent space around her. He did not look at her directly, but his gaze wandered. She was calm and steady, unshakable. Bakugo remarked that she did not seem nervous. She opened one eye and asked if she should be. He laughed and said even Midoriya was probably shaking in his boots, and she observed that meant not everyone was nervous. Bakugo huffed that she really was like her old man. YN stood and brushed dust from her knees, taking the comparison as a compliment. The lights dimmed and All Might's voice boomed through the speakers, signaling the start. Bakugo's smirk returned, and he cracked his knuckles, sparks flaring as he said it was time to clear the ranks. He turned toward the hallway but paused when YN called his name and warned him not to overdo it, reminding him that if he pushed too far he might lose his footing. For once he did not bark back, he simply nodded and moved ahead. YN followed a few steps behind, hands clasped behind her back, eyes cool and thoughtful. To anyone watching they looked mismatched chaos and calm, explosion and silence, but together they moved in rhythm. Neither would admit it yet, but they worked frighteningly well together. Inside the building, silence pressed around YN like heavy air. She moved lightly down the corridor, steps soft against the concrete floor, eyes glowing faintly as her quirk let her scan through walls. The plan was simple. Bakugo would draw attention and strike head-on while she guarded the weapon on the top floor. She knew he was itching for a fight. A distant blast rattled the building and dust fell from the ceiling. YN murmured that of course it had started already and turned toward the source, feeling the heat of Bakugo's quirk pulsing somewhere below. On the surveillance. Monitor All Might leaned forward with an eager grin, noting Bakugo's charge. YN reached for her earpiece to warn that Bakugo was going to scorch the whole floor, and Bakugo's rough voice told her to shut it and that he had it. She smirked faintly and admitted that was what worried her. Below, Midoriya and Uraraka advanced cautiously through the smoke of Bakugo's blast. Midoriya warned to be careful and observed that their opponent was already moving. Uraraka asked about YN, suggesting she was probably guarding the weapon, and Midoriya replied that YN was thinking ahead and was smart, his voice a mix of respect and tension. Above them, YN crouched near the objective, tracking movements through the walls and sensing Bakugo and Midoriya closing in like twin storms. The next blast shook the structure, sending chunks of ceiling falling. YN stood, realizing Bakugo might be losing control, and darted toward the stairwell. She used her quirk to slip between debris in brief, shimmering movements. The air grew hotter the closer she got. When she reached the lower hall, the sight stopped her. Midoriya was breathing hard, visibly shaken and injured, but keeping his footing. Bakugo stood before him, eyes wild, palms smoking, frustration written all over him. Bakugo demanded how Midoriya had a quirk, his voice low and charged. YN stepped between them and told them to stop, reminding them they were supposed to be working together instead of tearing down the building. Bakugo snapped at her to stay out of it, but after a moment he turned his back with a sharp exhale. YN's eyes softened slightly, he listened to her more than he admitted. Before the tension could settle, Midoriya surged forward, his right arm glowing with concentrated power. His punch ripped through the mock walls in a dramatic burst of wind and light, sending a sudden blast that knocked YN backward and sent debris raining down. The force of the strike echoed through the structure and left everyone stunned. Beyond the crumbling wall, All Might's smile vanished as shock moved across his face. He had been ready to declare the hero team victorious but froze at the unexpected intensity. The explosion had torn through the upper floors and smoke coiled through the air. Mock walls cracked and groaned as chunks of concrete fell. Midoriya stood amid the debris, his breathing heavy and his face pale from pain and shock. Uraraka shouted that he had done it and then froze when she saw him clearly injured. A moment later, YN emerged from the settling dust, calm and unshaken. Her uniform was scuffed, and she told Midoriya quietly that he should not have used so much power because his body could not keep up with that kind of output. Midoriya, struggling to speak, said he had to because of Bakugo. YN cut him off and told him to stop talking. She knelt beside him and held her hands just above his injured arm. A faint shimmer radiated from her palms as she focused on helping him recover. The air around them seemed to fold, glowing particles tracing delicate, fractal-like lines beneath YN's skin. The distortion spread, and slowly Midoriya's injuries began to close. The swelling receded, the wounds smoothing over as the faint hum of her quirk filled the ruined hallway. Midoriya's eyes widened, and he murmured that it wasn't hurting anymore. YN replied quietly that it shouldn't, explaining that she had removed the damage and rebuilt what was lost. She withdrew her hand and rose in one smooth motion, her eyes dimming back to their usual calm gray. Midoriya flexed his fingers, stunned, and asked if she could heal. YN corrected him softly, saying that she did not heal but reconstructed, and that there was a difference he would still need to see the recovery specialist. She left the rest unsaid and moved toward the exit. From a hidden angle near the collapsed doorway, a tall shadow leaned half out of sight. All Might's massive frame barely fit behind the cracked wall as he peeked over it like a nervous teacher caught spying. His blue eyes were wide. She had rebuilt him completely. Not regeneration, he realized, but reassembly. When he had first seen her erase the zero-pointer during the entrance exam, he had thought that was her limit. Watching her reverse damage at a molecular level sent a chill down his spine, not of fear, but of awe. He whispered to himself that she was rewriting reality. He straightened a bit, pretending not to be eavesdropping, as his communicator buzzed with the system's safety alerts. On screen, the UA response bots he had helped design glided over the shattered floor, scanning Midoriya's vitals before releasing stabilizer foam around his legs and torso. YN stepped back to let them work, expression blank. She noted aloud that they still functioned and moved away. The battle ended. The hero team had won. All Might announced it over the comms, congratulating everyone on completing the first match, but YN did not look at the screen. She only muttered that he was alive and that was what mattered, then left the building with calm steps, as if she had not just redefined the word power. She called Bakugo's name and, surprisingly gentle, guided him away from the scene, telling him to go. The metallic door hissed open and dust clung to their uniforms as 4 students stepped into the observation room. All Might stood waiting in his silver training armor, arms crossed and a faint grin lingering despite the smoke-stained mess the battle had left behind. The rest of Class 1A lined the sides of the room, whispering among themselves and eyes wide at the ones who had gone first. Midoriya's limp had mostly faded, though his restored arm trembled slightly. Uraraka stood close beside him, still giddy about the victory. Bakugo stalked in with his jaw tight and hands jammed in his pockets. YN followed last, quiet as a shadow, expression unreadable, eyes half-lidded. The tension in the room was thick. All Might clapped once to break the silence and called the match quite a spectacle. His booming laugh could not hide the careful way his eyes flicked toward YN and the damaged footage the support team was still reviewing. He summarized that the hero team had secured the bomb successfully, but reminded them every match held lessons. He first addressed Midoriya, praising his strategy, environmental use, teamwork, and instincts, but cautioning that he had relied on pure power and had paid a heavy cost to his body. Midoriya bowed slightly and promised he would control it better next time. All Might encouraged him warmly. Then All Might commended Uraraka for her quick thinking and teamwork in helping secure the bomb when a teammate was injured. Uraraka blushed and thanked him. The tone shifted as All Might turned to Bakugo. He told Bakugo that he had fought recklessly, letting emotion cloud his aim, and that while his strength and instincts were incredible, hero work required balance. Anger narrowed his vision and had nearly cost the match. Bakugo clenched his teeth and muttered that he could have won if he hadn't held back. All Might reminded him that victory without control wasn't true victory. Bakugo said nothing more, his glare at Midoriya burning, and YN noted the look with an analytical flick of her eyes. Then All Might addressed YN. The room fell silent. He called her performance exceptional, praising her restraint and awareness of her teammates' conditions remarkable for someone who had not technically been required to intervene. YN blinked slowly and stated simply that Midoriya had been dying. A few students flinched. All Might's expression softened. He agreed that her instinct to save a classmate captured the essence of a hero, but he noted that she had abandoned her assigned role as a villain and that it was a tactical misstep. YN acknowledged that it had been a tactical error without elaboration. Momo whispered to Todoroki that YN had rebuilt Midoriya from nothing and that it was more than a simple rescue. Todoroki said nothing but watched YN quietly. All Might concluded by expressing how much heart, pride, and potential the class possessed and urged them to learn and grow from the exercise. He asked them to prepare for the next teams. The room erupted into claps and chatter. Midoriya sighed in relief with Uraraka cheering beside him. Bakugo stormed past without another word. YN remained where she was, watching him go. Bakugo brushed past her shoulder roughly and growled that she should not think she was better than him. She did not flinch and answered that she did not think that. YN accused him that he thought everyone else was worse. He froze for a second before storming out the door. YN watched him disappear down the hall, then turned back toward the window and stared at the faint reflection of herself in the glass. All Might watched her from behind and exhaled, thinking that she was Aizawa's child and that explained her demeanor. The next match was about to begin, but YN did not look away from her reflection. The light caught her eyes just enough to show a glimmer of something, not pride or sadness, but thought. For someone who claimed to feel nothing, she looked oddly human in that silence. Chapter 11, Spark and Dusk. The day's training had ended hours ago, but the sun still clung to the sky, painting streaks of orange and violet over the UA campus. The breeze carried the faint metallic scent of sweat and concrete dust from the demolished training site. 2 figures stood near the front gate, a few meters apart, silent but charged with unspoken words. Midoriya adjusted the strap of his bag nervously. His right arm was still stiff, and the scars from YN's healing quirk had faded to faint silvery lines. Bakugo stood a few steps ahead, hands jammed into his pockets, eyes sharp and unreadable in the dying light. Midoriya looked down at his shoes and explained that he had obtained a quirk from somebody else and could not reveal who had given it to him. He insisted it was true, even if it sounded like a story from a comic, and admitted he could not fully use it yet because it felt like a borrowed power. He rambled on without noticing Bakugo's growing displeasure. Bakugo demanded what Midoriya meant by a borrowed power and accused him of trying to make a fool of him. He reminded Midoriya that he had been defeated today but declared that the defeat did not change his goal. He complained about the other students who had surprised him and, with a sudden edge of vulnerability, told Midoriya through clenched teeth that from now on he would become number one. Bakugo turned away with a curse and stormed out of the school gates. All Might appeared to offer comfort, but Bakugo shrugged him off and ignored him. Morning came with an unusual buzz. The UA gates were surrounded by flashing cameras, microphones, and eager reporters shouting questions about All Might teaching at UA. Reporters asked whether All Might was really teaching and what lessons he would offer. Midoriya flinched and said that he needed to go to the nurse's office. Uraraka shared her thoughts about All Might, and Ida offered a formal, lengthy response about the situation. A reporter abruptly identified Midoriya as the student involved in the sludge incident, and Bakugo pushed past the reporters while telling them to drop it. The crowd criticized All Might's appearance and manners, and Aizawa moved to shoo them away. When the reporters ignored him, YN appeared behind them with a dark glare and heavy bags under her eyes from a sleepless night. She gave a curt rebuke that sent a chill through the group. The UA barrier came down hard, forcing the reporters back and clearing the entrance. Inside Class 1A, the students were barely settling down. The noise outside filtered through the windows and made everyone tense. Denki groaned over his desk and complained that the press should have better things to do than stalk you. Character profile: YN Aizawa. Full name: YN Aizawa. Alias: Project, Null Genesis, former, The Void's Heir, used by villains. Age: 15, current timeline, UA first year. Birthday: March 11th. Height: 156 centimeters, 5 feet 1 inch. Affiliation: UA High School, Class 1A. Guardian: Aizawa Shoyuta, Eraserhead. Quirk: Null Genesis. Type: Emitter Hybrid. YN can erase any form of energy or quirk, absorbing its essence and reconstructing it into a new energy type under her control. However, using this ability drains her life force and destabilizes her body over time. She is still learning to balance erasure and creation. At full release, she risks unraveling herself completely. Limitations: prolonged use causes intense neural strain and temporary blindness. She cannot absorb purely emotion-driven quirks fully, only their energy signatures. Aizawa trained her to focus on control rather than raw output. Symbolism: the quirk represents rebirth, destruction and creation, void and life. Personality: quiet, detached, and analytical, often mistaken for emotionless. Observes more than she speaks. When she does speak, her words are sharp and deliberate. Shows subtle kindness through actions rather than words. Has a deadpan sense of humor inherited from Aizawa. Struggles with social warmth but becomes fiercely protective once bonded to someone. Occasionally zones out mid-conversation, lost in complex thoughts about quirks or life. YN admitted she did not like noise, but she did not like silence either. Silence reminded her of the lab. Kirishima chuckled, brushed his red hair, and remarked that the reporters were just doing their jobs and that All Might bringing a teacher was big news. Bakugo clicked his tongue and dismissed them as vultures who should focus on their own lives instead of crowding UA's gates. From her seat near the window, YN watched the frenzy with mild curiosity. Her eyes caught the sunlight on the glass, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She took a quiet sip from her water bottle, pretending not to notice the way Denki and Kirishima kept glancing her way. Aizawa entered with a stack of papers and set them down, saying he hoped everyone was rested after the previous day's battle trial and that he had reviewed their marks and evaluations. He called Bakugo by name and admonished him to stop acting like a child and wasting his talent. Bakugo muttered that he knew. Aizawa then turned to Midoriya and warned about the danger of overexerting his arm, prompting YN to start to drift away into thought. Ida intervened loudly, stressing trust and responsibility and insisting the matter be settled by a vote while raising his hand and appealing to their teacher. Aizawa responded curtly that whatever the decision, it should not disturb him, and he withdrew to his seat. Later, YN stood at the podium and deadpanned that she wondered who had voted for her. The class settled on her as president, with Yaoyorozu as vice president. The cafeteria buzzed with the midday rush. Students filled the space, and YN sat at her usual corner table where the Baku squad had unofficially claimed territory. Kirishima leaned forward with his tray and teased how it felt to lead them mortals. YN absently poked at her rice with chopsticks and dismissed the importance of titles, insisting a title did not define leadership. Kaminari laughed and suggested it sounded like something Aizawa would say. Mina chimed in that maybe YN was secretly Aizawa's favorite student. Bakugo scoffed and said she was simply quieter than the others. YN raised an eyebrow and noted that quiet people usually got more done. Kirishima laughed at the comparison and Bakugo scowled, calling him hair for brains. For a moment, the group laughed and everything felt ordinary. The cafeteria lights suddenly flashed red and emergency alarms echoed through the building. Mina froze mid-bite, confused by the sudden change. YN was already on her feet and identified the sound as the perimeter alarm. Kaminari blinked in surprise at her knowledge. YN explained that she had helped calibrate UA's security matrix during intake week and that the alarm's code sequence indicated not a distant attack but a manual bypass of the gate. Bakugo frowned and asked if she meant someone had walked in. YN agreed that someone had either entered or forced the gate open with a quirk. Nisa's voice soon came over the speakers, maintaining a calm tone but acknowledging a minor breach at the main gate and assuring that teachers were responding. The single word breach was enough to stir panic. Students murmured and some began moving toward the exits despite instructions to stay put. Bakugo muttered that they were idiots. YN adjusted her sleeve and told her group to remain where they were before she headed toward the main building. Kirishima reached for her arm but hesitated and asked if she was really going out there. YN nodded once and said someone needed to check the damage. Bakugo watched her go with a tight jaw and muttered that she was reckless. YN moved through the halls toward the main gate, alert and focused on assessing the situation. The UA dorms had never been this loud. Paper ghosts floated from the ceiling, jack-o'-lanterns flickered with lazy orange light, and someone had rigged a smoke machine that made the hall look like a fogged-up movie set. In the middle of all the noise, YN stood still in front of the mirror. The red velvet fabric hugged her figure, the small horns glinting under the dim dorm lights. Midnight, their teacher, had personally approved the costume. A sleek black choker sat around her neck, and a tiny devil's tail swayed with her every move. She did not think it looked like much. When she stepped outside, the music cut for a second and every head turned. Kirishima nearly dropped his cup of pumpkin punch. Denki stared in open surprise. Even Bakugo, mid-argument with Mina, fell silent and the words died on his tongue. Denki's eyes sparkled as he remarked that she looked striking. YN blinked and tilted her head, reminding them that she was supposed to be the devil. Denki declared that mission accomplished, and Kirishima elbowed him. Bakugo scowled from across the room and demanded who on earth had let her out of her room. Todoroki explained that Midnight had said the costume encouraged self-expression. Bakugo grumbled about expelling Midnight. YN adjusted her gloves, oblivious to the tension. The night was chaos wrapped in laughter. Mina and Jairu ran the haunted house. Ida tried to enforce a safety perimeter with a clipboard in hand, and Denki broke every rule possible. Behind the dorms, a test of courage awaited, a maze of fog, flickering candles, and floating lights set up through the trees. Ida announced that everyone should go in pairs to ensure safety. Inevitably, chaos followed. Denki immediately claimed YN as his partner, calling dibs on the devil. Bakugo refused flatly, using Denki's nickname. Kirishima laughed and insisted it was just for fun. Bakugo snapped that it was not fun, warning that getting electrocuted by Denki was dangerous. YN offered to go with anyone. Todoroki stepped forward gently and asked her to come with him. Midoriya suggested they form a strategy, his voice awkward with nerves. Denki suggested she go last to save the best for last. YN sighed inwardly, thinking it was only a walk, and Bakugo scoffed that she would change her mind if she tripped over her tail. By the time it was her turn, the woods were soaked in moonlight and smelled of rain and leaves. Laughter echoed distantly through the trees. YN ended up paired with Bakugo after Denki's suspiciously rigged random draw. They walked in silence for a while, the crunch of gravel under their boots. YN held a dim lantern that flickered like a heartbeat. Bakugo observed that she was unusually quiet. She pointed out that he was quiet too. He insisted he was not quiet but focused. She asked what he was focused on and teased that it might be the fake ghosts. He retorted that she sounded like her father, and she noted that he said it as if it were an insult. A brief grin tugged at his mouth before he turned away and dismissed it. They went deeper into the fog. Classmates in costume moved between the trees, trying to startle passers-by. A fake skeleton dropped from a branch and Bakugo nearly detonated a blast, but YN stopped him with a hand on his arm, reminding him that it would be property damage. He stared at her hand. She did not realize she had touched him. Her fingers were cold and faintly trembling, not from fear but from restraint, and her quirk hummed softly in response to the tension. He noticed and asked if she was okay. She admitted that she was tired and that so much noise sometimes stirred her quirk. He frowned and asked why she was there then, and she replied that she was there because everyone else was. His hand brushed hers briefly and clumsily before he tucked it into his pocket. He told her to stay close, calling her devil. Elsewhere in the woods, Midoriya, Ida, Kirishima, and Denki wandered in overlapping paths, occasionally running into each other. Midoriya expressed worry that YN had been gone a while and suggested they check on her. Kirishima laughed it off, pointing out Bakugo was with her and that she would be fine. Denki admitted that this was precisely why he was worried. Ida sighed, adjusting his glasses and reminding them of the exercise's educational purpose. Then something flickered in the air. The forest lights dimmed for a second and a low hum ran through the leaves. From the shadows, YN and Bakugo emerged unharmed, calm, and faintly glowing red from the small devil horns YN had manifested with her quirk. She stopped in front of the group, tail swaying lazily, and said she had found the exit. Denki blinked and asked if she had just reset the maze. YN replied that she had simplified it because the fog had become annoying. Bakugo crossed his arms and, hiding a smirk, suggested she was cheating with an incredible quirk. Back at the dorms, the exercise ended with everyone in the common room laughing, tired, trading candy and stories. Mina showed off photos, Kirishima retold how Denki had screamed at a plastic spider, and Todoroki quietly handed YN a cup of warm cider. Todoroki asked if she had enjoyed herself. She hesitated, taking in her classmates, the dim glow of jack-o'-lanterns, and the soft music. She said that it had been loud but not bad. Todoroki nodded, his expression gentle, and for the first time she smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips. As the night deepened, they sat together under the pumpkin lights with warm drinks in hand and laughter blending into the music. The chaos softened into a kind of peace she had not realized she had been craving. YN leaned back, eyelids growing heavy. Bakugo teased Denki quietly. Midoriya made notes about everyone's costumes. Todoroki drifted into thought. Kirishima laughed so hard he fell off the couch. Surrounded by them, she felt something close to normal. The pumpkin lights flickered overhead like stars. YN murmured that it was a happy Halloween. No one heard her voice, but somehow they all smiled. After the chaos settled, the students returned to their respective classrooms. Momo calmly instructed the class representative to start, and YN blinked and sighed tiredly. YN declined to take the role and passed it to Ida, which confused everyone. Ida stood up, eyes wide behind his glasses, explaining that she could not simply hand the role off and asking if she was certain while saying he was honored. YN shrugged and told him he was better at leadership, rules, and structure, and praised how he had handled the earlier disturbance. Kirishima grinned and noted that he would not have minded YN as representative, while Denki compared Ida to a warning sign and the class began to cheer. By the time classes ended, the tension from the lunchtime chaos still clung to the air. The school had settled into a strained quiet. Students whispered about the incident, teachers patrolled the halls, and the faint hum of cleanup echoed outside. YN walked past the murmuring crowds with her usual unreadable expression. She could have gone back to her room, but something compelled her to go to the source of the commotion, UA's damaged gate. The sun was setting behind the campus, casting long shadows over the ruined entrance. The once mighty steel barrier lay reduced to twisted fragments and fine dust, as if someone had wiped it away. Teachers were already at work. Cementos reinforced what remained of the wall, Midnight and Present Mike helped keep the reporters at bay, and Nizu stood calmly amid the wreckage. Nizu speculated about the possibility of a deliberate act. Aizawa glanced up as YN approached and advised her that she should be resting after a chaotic day. YN stopped beside him and scanned the ruined metal, saying that she could not ignore it and that the alarm had not been a coincidence. Aizawa did not argue. YN crouched and let the ash sift through her gloved fingers. It fell away almost without weight and left no residue or scorch marks on the surrounding ground. She observed that there was no sign of an explosion, no traces of fire or impact, and concluded that the gate had not been blown apart but erased in a controlled manner. Cementos paused mid-work and suggested disintegration as the cause. YN agreed, noting that the effect had been precise and contained to the gate's frame, which meant the perpetrator had full control of their quirk and knew what they were doing. Nisa's expression grew intrigued as he asked whether she believed a quirk user had targeted the entrance deliberately. YN confirmed her suspicion but added that she did not think the intent had been to gain entry. Midnight asked why the gate would be destroyed if not to get inside. YN looked toward the outer fields where a few drones hovered, keeping the press at a distance, and said that the act seemed designed to cause panic and draw attention while something or someone else moved unnoticed elsewhere. Silence fell for a moment as the teachers considered the possibility. Aizawa said they would need to review every security blind spot that night. YN volunteered to help, but Aizawa told her to go rest, insisting she had done enough. She nodded without argument, eyes still fixed on the scattered dust as the wind scattered it like gray snow. She murmured to herself that whoever had done this had known exactly how to get their attention, then turned away from the ruins unaware that this was only the beginning. The next day the clock neared 12:50 p.m. and sunlight slanted across the windows of Class 1. Laughter buzzed as everyone settled in after lunch. Mina and Kaminari swapped snacks. Ida reminded everyone to stay in their seats, and Bakugo stared out the window pretending not to listen. YN sat in her usual spot near the back with her chin resting on her palm and eyes half-lidded in quiet disinterest. The sliding door opened and Aizawa announced that the class would be supervised by a 3-person team including him and other pro-heroes. Siro raised his hand and asked what they would be doing, and Aizawa explained that they would study rescue, the foundational skill of heroics. He held up a card labeled Rescue and described the day as the trial of rescue. Denki and Mina reacted that it sounded difficult, while Kirishima grew excited and said that being a hero was what they had trained for. Tsuyu noted that the flood environment was her specialty. Later, standing in the corner in costume, YN lost herself in thought while gazing at the sky. Ida instructed the students to file into 2 lines according to their numbers to board the bus. YN snapped out of her reverie, boarded the bus, and took a seat near the back window. Ida sat dutifully in the corner, and YN only registered the oncoming conversation when her name was mentioned. Classmates debated who combined flashiness and strength best, listing Todoroki, Bakugo, and Aizawa. Tsuyu bluntly observed that Bakugo's constant scowl would not make him popular, and Bakugo erupted in indignation. YN covered her ears and looked away until they arrived at the training site. When the students disembarked, many of them trailed after Aizawa while YN stood beside him and observed. The instructor introduced the practical training area he had created to simulate floods, landslides, fires, and other disasters. Some of the students cheered the space hero who had designed the venue, while YN studied the structure, curving architecture, emergency panels, and the faint hum of machinery beneath her boots. She noted the scale and stability of the facility, estimating the ceiling height and the size of the water sector. 13, the space hero, began a briefing and warned that their quirk, black hole, could absorb anything and everything and therefore had to be used with caution. Kaminari leaned over. Bakugo asked if YN was even listening. YN hummed distractedly and scanned the area, saying she was calculating perimeter and weak points. Bakugo snorted and called her a nerd. In the middle of 13's explanation, the lights flickered. It was faint, just a pulse. Most didn't notice, but YN did. Her gaze snapped toward the central fountain. The rippling water trembled unnaturally as shadows pooled together and began to swirl, inky and alive. YN noted that this was not part of the simulation. The air pressure changed and a wind-like sound folded in on itself, making her skin prickle. A growing sphere of darkness twisted in the center of the dome, faint sparks of violet dancing at its edges. YN frowned and stepped closer to Aizawa, tugging at his sleeve and calling his attention. Aizawa blinked and asked what was wrong. YN pointed toward the fountain and said there was something there. He followed her line of sight and his eyes immediately widened. Aizawa jumped into action, putting on his goggles and ordering everyone to huddle up and not move. Kirishima shouted, asking if this was part of the test as they gathered together. YN approached the group with her usual nonchalant aura and stared at her adoptive father, telling the others that these were real villains. Aizawa noted the situation and remembered that, according to the teacher's curriculum, Mr. All Might was supposed to be present. The mist around Kurogiri started speaking and his yellow, misty eyes flared. YN remained still, calm, and calculating. Her mind began stitching fragments together in a perfect, terrifying silence. The reporters breaching the gate and the security alert had pulled staff outside the building, she observed. Her voice barely above a whisper, she concluded that the reporter incident had been a distraction. Kaminari asked what she meant. YN explained that the reporter incident had not been random but staged to draw teachers out of the building. Kirishima blinked and asked if she was saying that someone had sneaked into the school during the chaos. YN elaborated that they had likely gathered files, data, and schedules and now knew when All Might's class was planned. Her eyes hardened as she declared that the villains had been watching them from the start. Aizawa stepped in front of the class with his scarf unfurling and instructed everyone to stay back, saying he would handle the situation. YN did not move, but her gaze stayed fixed on Kurogiri, who seemed almost amused by her realization. Kurogiri remarked that at least one of them understood. Another villain, gaunt and rough-voiced, complained about the lack of All Might and speculated darkly about whether All Might would show up if the students were harmed. Aizawa told 13 to guard the students while he took the front and then called to YN, telling her she was with him. Kirishima and Ida protested, concerned that she was going too, but Aizawa said she was capable and that the others would be safer where they were. He instructed YN not to hesitate and to simply act. YN hesitated for only a heartbeat before nodding her agreement. Aizawa leapt first, scarf flaring like a shadow, and YN followed without a word, landing beside him on the concrete. Villains charged. YN moved on instinct, ducking, pivoting, and striking with precision. A clean kick to the ribs and a twist to disarm a blade were followed by the faint hum of her quirk beneath her skin, a pulse of controlled power guiding her balance and accuracy. Aizawa moved alongside her in seamless rhythm, his scarf snapping out to bind 3 enemies at once as he reminded everyone to stay sharp. YN confirmed that she was focused and dodged another swing, countering with a well-timed strike that forced an enemy back. Above them, classmates watched wide-eyed from the mezzanine, commenting on how calm and practiced YN appeared. Down below, the crowd of villains parted slightly and a thin, twitchy man emerged, clutching his neck. His pale hair hung forward, obscuring his eyes, but when he looked up his gaze locked on YN. She froze mid-step, her chest tightening for reasons she could not name. The man stared at her as if the world had gone silent, his breath hitching and then breaking into a shaky whisper as he declared that she was alive. YN furrowed her brows and asked if she should know him. The man laughed in a dry, broken manner and accused her of forgetting him, accusing those in the lab of erasing her memory of the experiments. His fingers twitched against his skin. YN's heartbeat faltered at the mention of the lab. A flash of cold metal and a brief image of a small hand gripping hers in the dark surfaced, a boy's voice whispering her name from the other side of a glass wall. The memory faded quickly and she tried to say she did not remember, but before she could finish, the man lunged, fingers outstretched and trembling as he accused her of leaving him behind. Aizawa reacted instantly, sending his scarf snapping between them and commanding everyone to focus. The scarf wrapped around the man's arm and pulled him back, neutralizing his quirk under Aizawa's glare. Aizawa warned the class not to engage the man directly because he was unstable. YN nodded stiffly, heart pounding, but she could still feel the man's eyes on her filled not only with fury but with a deeper yearning. The man, Shigaraki, rasped that he had waited for her 10 years and had thought she was gone. YN felt her stomach twist at the mention of 10 years and the lab. The pieces did not fit yet, but a cold realization was beginning to stir. Above the clash of quirks and the trembling dome, YN could not shake the thought that this attack on UA might be personal. Flashback 10 years earlier. Fluorescent lights hummed above the room and soft static filled the silence. YN sat motionless on a metal table with small hands folded on her knees, eyes blank and distant as adults in white coats murmured around her. She did not flinch when a needle pricked her skin and did not ask why it hurt. She simply watched. Across the room, a boy around her age stood by a broken console, running his fingers along the cracks. His white hair shimmered under the light. When his red eyes met hers, he smiled awkwardly but genuinely. He walked closer and observed that she did not speak much. She tilted her head, the question not quite registering and wondering what he meant by talking. He chuckled and explained that he meant saying things and feeling things. She found the word feel strange on her tongue. He blinked, surprised, and asked if she did not know what that meant. She shook her head and replied that the doctor had warned that emotions caused mistakes, and she should not have them. For a moment he was silent, then he reached out and poked her forehead, whispering that he would teach her so she would know how to smile. She did not understand why his voice made her chest tighten or why her face warmed. She only knew that something inside her had moved for the first time. Chapter 14, The Breaking Point. The air inside the USJ dome felt heavy and oppressive. Distant explosions made the ground tremble, and the sound echoed off steel and glass. Villains swarmed from every corner, their cries and the chaos blending into a constant cacophony. YN moved through the smoke like a blade, silent and precise. Her expression remained calm and controlled as she countered a lunging villain with a swift kick that sent him tumbling into the debris. Each motion was calculated, each heartbeat measured. She did not think about fear, exhaustion, or chaos. She focused only on movement and survival. A low, guttural roar sliced through the noise. Her head snapped toward the center of the battlefield and blood ran cold. Teacher lay on the ground, his scarf torn and his goggles shattered, clearly injured. A hulking, monstrous figure of exposed muscle and dark flesh pinned him down, its massive hand tangled in his hair and pressing his head into the floor. Her breath caught and for a moment her mind refused to accept what she saw. She stepped forward. The world seemed to slow, screams faded and the ringing in her ears grew louder, matching the pounding in her chest. She choked on the word teacher. Her heartbeat skipped, then surged. Her quirk stirred in response to the rush of emotion, causing faint distortions in the air around her like heat waves. Nearby villains froze as the ground began to vibrate beneath their feet. Her fists clenched and her breathing trembled. She told herself to stay calm, to control it, but the Nomu tightened its grip and teacher's body twitched in pain, a faint groan escaping him. That noise broke something inside her. The restraint she had maintained snapped. She ordered the Nomu to let him go, her voice sharp and laced with fury she had not known she possessed. Her pulse roared in her ears until it became everything. A concussive shockwave burst from her body, cracking tiles beneath her feet and sending dust into the air. Villains closest to her stumbled back, shielding themselves from the invisible blast. Her power responded wildly to her emotions, flaring in pulses that distorted the air. The Nomu released teacher's hair and stood, towering over her. She did not back down. Her gaze remained locked and unwavering. She raised a hand slowly, faint ripples shimmering around her arm as vibrations in the air intensified into a low hum. The Nomu lunged. She met it head-on. Her palm struck its chest and a thunderous shockwave threw the creature backward, slamming it into a pillar and cracking concrete on impact. The creature pushed itself up, its wounds closing and steam rising as it knit itself back together in a way that made its resilience obvious. She noted its regeneration and felt her quirk surging uncontrollably with each erratic beat of her heart. Breathing became a struggle, each pulse sent another wave of energy through her. Teacher groaned faintly, too weak to stand. She knelt beside him, seeing him battered and trying to raise his head. She told him to stay down and braced herself as the Nomu charged again. Their clash sent another thunderous pulse across the battlefield. Dust and wind exploded outward, obscuring everything for a moment. When the air cleared, she was breathing heavily, arm trembling, and the Nomu was momentarily stunned several meters away. Her heartbeat remained erratic, the tempo of a storm refusing to calm. Panic crept in as she felt her control slipping and her quirk screaming to be released. Her vision flickered and the edges of her thoughts darkened under the weight of the energy building within her. For the first time, the girl known for calm detachment looked terrified of herself. YN stumbled through smoke, debris crunching beneath her boots, and the air thick with dust and the metallic tang of the battlefield. She moved to Teacher's side and slid to her knees. His breathing was shallow and uneven. A wound marked his temple and his goggles lay shattered nearby. Her heartbeat spiked until sound and motion narrowed to a single point. She placed her hands gently over his chest. The familiar hum of her quirk ignited, unstable and sharp, pulsing with her racing heart. Light flared beneath her palms, first soft then erratic, flickering like a candle struggling against wind. She urged him to hold on and focused on steadying her breathing. The world around her began to tremble as her body wavered under the strain. She tried to calm the surge of power inside her and keep him safe until help could arrive. Her vision pulsed with every frantic beat of her heart. She could feel her quirk drawing too much from her, demanding more than her body could give. Sweat ran down her temple and her breath came in short gasps. She vowed that he would not die here. Not while she was still breathing. Her heartbeat thundered and her light brightened for a brief, fragile moment. She felt faint movement beneath her hands as Aizawa's chest rose in a shallow breath, and relief crashed over her, sharp and immediate. Pain followed it. Her sight dimmed and the world tilted. Black spots crept across her vision. Her body screamed for her to stop. Her eyes twitched uncontrollably, and the harder she tried to focus, the more the light seemed to drain away. Still, she kept going, ignoring the sting in her fingertips and the ache in her skull. She forced one last surge of energy through her quirk and begged silently for him to stay. The glow beneath her hands flickered and then faded. Her pulse slowed, uneven. For a moment, there was silence. Aizawa's fingers twitched. That tiny motion made her chest seize. Relief and exhaustion washed through her in a ragged breath, and she let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob as her shoulders dropped. Her body swayed, vision collapsing inward as darkness crept from the edges. She tried to stay upright, but her strength failed her. The last thing she saw was Aizawa's chest rising and the faint shimmer of sunlight breaking through the fractured dome above them. Then everything went black. Chapter 15, Breaking Point. The dome was collapsing. Screams, smoke, and the heavy thud of destruction filled the air, but Aizawa could see only her. YN's small figure hit the ground hard, dust scattering around her. Her head lolled to the side, eyes half-lidded, her breathing faint and uneven. The pulse of her quirk had gone silent. Aizawa dragged himself across the cracked tiles, each movement a battle against shredded muscles and exhaustion. He urged her to get up, voice raw. A shadow loomed over her. The Nomu tilted its head, red eyes glinting with an unnerving awareness, and reached down to seize her arm. Aizawa screamed as the monster ignored him. It threw her through the air. She collided with a broken pillar and dust cascaded around the motionless figure. The impact echoed through the ruined space. The Nomu went for her again, lifting her effortlessly and driving her into the ground with repeated, brutal force. The floor cracked under the violence and Aizawa's vision blurred with rage and panic. He shouted for it to stop and tried to activate his quirk, but his vision flickered and his power faltered from overuse. He staggered to his feet, capture cloth trailing behind him, each step like walking through a storm of pain. The Nomu swung and hurled YN across the floor. She struck a wall and slumped, unmoving. Aizawa slipped on rubble but reached her and dropped to his knees, hands trembling as he lifted her with desperate care. Her body was limp and cold to the touch. His composure shattered. He pleaded for her to breathe and brushed hair from her face, fingers searching for a pulse that flickered faintly. Relief and pain twisted together inside him as he felt for any sign of life. The Nomu turned back toward them with a low, menacing growl. Aizawa moved without hesitation, placing himself between the creature and the girl. His capture cloth lifted slightly. His whole frame shook, but he stood ready to defend. He told the Nomu that if it touched her again, he would not allow it to continue. The monster advanced and Aizawa braced himself, bleeding and broken but unyielding, protecting the unconscious girl he had come to care for like family. All Might arrived with a grim expression, having cut short formalities to check on the site after a bad feeling. He moved with decisive speed through the chaos, intercepting oncoming villains in his wake. In a single swift motion he scooped the injured YN into his arms and pulled Aizawa away from the immediate danger, placing them both out of reach of the Nomu. Aizawa coughed as they landed, clutching YN's hand. Her fingers were alarmingly cold. Aizawa pleaded for the creature not to touch her again. All Might nodded firmly and answered that he would not allow it. He acted quickly to secure the area, pulling 3 students from the water and moving them to safety near Aizawa and YN. He ordered the students to head toward the entrance and said he would leave their teacher and the unconscious girl in their care. Nearby, Shigaraki groaned that things were not going well. He reached toward a fallen hand and muttered, half laughing, about the opportunistic violence his forces had used. His words tumbled into a disjointed litany names and fragments in unsteady, mocking commentary on the chaos. All Might launched himself at the Nomu, trading powerful blows in a fast, intense exchange. The Nomu remained unfazed by the initial strikes and pushed back, the clash of their attacks filling the ruined hall. The battle unfolded like a high-impact sequence from a fierce, stylized conflict, each move full of force but free of graphic detail. All Might leapt behind the Nomu, drove it down by its head, and the impact rang out like a drumbeat. Midoriya carried Aizawa in a piggyback, while Tsu and Mineta carefully supported YN, who was hurt and limp. When the dust settled, the Nomu's upper body was half shielded by Kurogiri's quirk and All Might's body arched backward as the Nomu gripped his waist from below, forcing him to cry out. All Might yelped for Tsu to get Aizawa off his back, and Mineta protested that they still had YN with them. Midoriya ignored the protest and set Aizawa down, racing toward All Might. Bakugo charged through, tackling Kurogiri by its neckplate and snarling for Midoriya to get out of the way. Todoroki's cold voice cut in as he sent ice across the field toward the Nomu. Kirishima surged in from behind to strike at Shigaraki but missed and regrouped beside Bakugo, cursing his own timing. Bakugo warned Kurogiri not to try anything, and Todoroki warned that the symbol of peace would not fall easily. Chapter 16, Aftermath of Chaos. Flashback. The lab. The air inside the lab was sterile and cold, the kind that made each breath sting. Machines hummed softly around a small glass chamber. Inside sat a little girl, hands on her knees, eyes blank and expression unreadable. She did not cry, she seemed almost indifferent to the world. On the other side of the glass stood a man in a long white coat and a boy with messy pale blue hair, wide curious eyes, and hands tucked into oversized sleeves. The man noted the quirk's name, Null Genesis, the power to erase and recreate, and that it remained unstable. The boy protested that she had a name and was more than a quirk. The man did not reply. Through the speaker, the girl asked why the boy was there again. He answered that she did not talk to anyone else, and when she said words felt empty he promised to sit and talk anyway. Every day he described the outside world: color, warmth, people pressing his hand to the glass until sometimes she mirrored the gesture. That was how they met, a boy craving connection and a girl too numb to understand it. The boy loved the lab because she was there, because she did not flinch when she saw him, because she did not see him as a failure. Present USJ grounds. The scene after the fight smelled of smoke and hot metal. YN's eyes fluttered open with effort. Darkness seemed to press at the edges of her vision, her body heavy and her breathing shallow. She tried to speak and could only whisper Tsuyu's name. Tsuyu launched into relief, telling YN to stay still and that all might had gotten her out. YN attempted to lift a hand but stopped when it trembled uncontrollably. Tsuyu urged her not to push and promised Recovery Girl would help. Pieces of the battle returned in fragments. Aizawa injured, the Nomu roaring, the black mist, and with them came a softer, older voice from the past. YN murmured a name that felt like a half-remembered promise. Tenko. Tsuyu looked puzzled at the name, but YN did not elaborate. Her quirk pulsed faintly beneath her skin as she commented that she was breaking again. Tsuyu tightened her hold and said they were almost safe. As they rushed away, YN slipped between present and memory back to the child's laughter behind glass and the boy who had whispered that they would be free once they got out. When consciousness returned in the nurse's office, the sterile scent of disinfectant and the soft hum of machines greeted her. YN's eyelids fluttered against dim light. Everything felt muffled, as if she were underwater. Her throat was dry and her arms felt heavy. She reached out and realized she could not see. A familiar, tired voice identified itself as Teacher Aizawa and confirmed she was awake. He explained that she had been out for 2 days and that Null Genesis had overloaded her neural pathways, and noted that she was fortunate her heart had not stopped. When she asked about the others, he assured her they were safe and that All Might had handled the rest. Aizawa admitted he should not have left her in the fight, and YN, with a rough voice, reminded him that she had been his backup. Aizawa crossed his arms and called her insufferable. YN admitted she had picked that up from him. The silence that followed was heavy with worry neither wanted to voice. Aizawa's gaze softened as he looked at the bandages around her forehead and eyes and relayed Recovery Girl's assessment that her vision would return in time. A distant name pressed at the edge of YN's thoughts, Tenko, and she described seeing someone, though she tried to dismiss it as nothing. Aizawa suggested that nothing would knock her out cold, but he did not press her. He adjusted his scarf and told her to rest because she would need it. Before leaving, YN thanked him for coming back for her. Aizawa warned her not to make him face that moment again, then left the room. When the door clicked shut, YN exhaled slowly. Her pulse was steady now, her heartbeat no longer triggering her quirk's unstable surge. In the darkness behind her closed eyes she could still see him, the boy from the lab who had once promised freedom, now a man standing on the opposite side. Her fingers tightened slightly on the blanket as she whispered Tenko, barely audible, wondering what had happened to him. Outside, the faint echo of recovery robots moved through the halls, the steady sound of rebuilding and life going on. For YN, though, it felt like something older had been unearthed, and she wasn't sure she was ready to face it. Chapter 17 Blind Resolve. By the time YN and Aizawa reached classroom 1A, the morning bell had already rung. Every student was seated, bags tucked away, conversations fading into the usual pre-homeroom chatter. The halls were empty except for the soft padding of YN's footsteps behind Aizawa. Her eyes were still completely blind, the bandages, white and neat and tied at the back of her head like a clean silk wrap, protected her from light, pressure, and questions. Ida burst through Class 1A's door with his arms wide, calling for everyone's attention and insisting they take their seats. Ciro pointed out that they were already seated and teased Ida, who sulked and returned to his place while Uraraka patted his back to calm him. When Aizawa entered without ceremony, he offered a quiet greeting. The class reacted with surprise and praise at his early return, and Ida raised his hand, clearly relieved to see their teacher. Uraraka questioned whether Aizawa truly seemed all right. YN stepped into the room behind him and instantly drew 20 pairs of eyes. She walked calmly, chin slightly lowered, steps measured and confident despite the lack of sight. There were no searching hands, no hesitation, only quiet certainty as she listened for the subtle shifts of air, counted desks, and remembered spacing. Mina gasped softly, Ciro froze mid-stretch, and even Bakugo showed a flash of surprise before returning to his usual indignant posture. Aizawa did not waste time. He told the class that YN would be wearing the bandages for a while, explained that her vision was temporarily affected, handed the attendance papers to Ida, who stood so quickly his chair screeched, and instructed everyone not to bother her about it. YN found her seat effortlessly, sliding in with the grace of someone who had memorized the room down to the millimeter. Denki remarked that she walked better blindfolded than he did with 2 eyes, and Kirishima elbowed him to show some respect. YN folded her hands neatly on her desk and did not react to the teasing. Aizawa's voice grew more serious as he reminded them that their training was not over and announced that the UA Sports Festival was coming up. The class leaned forward at the news. Bakugo scoffed at the idea of another battle, Midoriya tensed, and Mineta reacted with horror at the prospect of more villains. YN remained still and listened as Aizawa explained that training would intensify starting that day and warned them not to embarrass him. He glanced at YN briefly, the concern in his eyes noticeable, and she lifted her chin slightly to signal that she would manage. The room buzzed with excitement and chatter, but YN stayed quiet, her expression unreadable beneath the bandages and her heartbeat slow and steady as she already began calculating how to fight without sight. As soon as Aizawa turned to leave, the tension in the room relaxed. Mina scooted her chair closer and offered to guide YN around and help with fashion choices if needed. YN accepted the offer with a light huff and a simple thanks. Shiro leaned back and promised the class would help her avoid mishaps, and Kirishima proudly volunteered to handle any obstacles, though Momo gently suggested practical assistance with lessons and offered to prepare notes. YN admitted that notes would help. Ida assured YN that he could assist academically and would make sure she stayed up to speed. Jairu offered to quiet the louder students if the room became overwhelming, while Kaminari protested that he was quiet, earning a deadpan response about his loud breathing. Tokoyami, in his dramatic manner, said that darkness could be an ally rather than an enemy. Shoji offered to guide her with a simple desk tap, confident his hearing would catch it. Koda, shy but determined, offered to use the courtyard pets to help keep YN clear of obstacles. YN thanked him quietly. Sato placed a wrapped pastry on her desk, explaining it was soft bread with honey for energy, and YN accepted it, surprised by the small kindness. Ojiro offered mobility training that didn't require sight, and YN welcomed the help. Hagakure cheerfully told YN to call out if she looked lost, promising emotional presence even if invisible. Mineta became emotional and admitted he had almost cried when he heard she was alive, prompting Shiro to mutter that Mineta should calm down before he did something drastic to quiet him. Tsuyu spoke gently and honestly, expressing pride that YN had returned so soon and offering to stay close by to ensure no one accidentally bumped into her. YN felt her throat tighten and admitted she hadn't expected so much concern. Mina beamed and called the response natural for classmates, and Kirishima affirmed their friendship. Even Bakugo, arms crossed and pretending not to listen, muttered under his breath that she should not die again because it was annoying. Despite the bandages, the blank darkness, and the ache in her body, a small smile tugged at YN's lips. The classroom felt like home. Chapter 18 Caramel and Silence. The morning moved strangely slow. For most of Class 1A, the day had already shifted back into routine. Students chatted, scribbled on notebooks, and compared lunch plans. A sense of normalcy was pushing back after the USJ incident. For YN, however, the world still moved as if underwater. Sightless behind the bandages, quiet and distant, she sat alone with her hands folded on her desk, almost ghost-like. The bell hadn't rung yet, but the classroom buzzed with the usual movements. Chairs squeaking, bento boxes opening, laughter rising in soft waves. She ignored all of it, holding her posture as if it were the only tether to the present. From the back of the room, Bakugo watched her. He watched, not stared. Arms crossed and chin tucked down, his scowl was his usual mask, but his eyes kept flicking toward her. No one else noticed how she did not track conversations or turn toward noise, how she remained still unless addressed directly. She simply existed there, a painfully still silhouette. Bakugo clicked his tongue in frustration. He hated that he noticed. He hated that her blindness, temporary or not, was no weakness for her. If anything, she carried it like armor, unshakable, untouchable, as if she did not need anyone. In fact, she acted like she did not want anyone. When the lunch bell rang, chairs scraped and bags rustled. Friends formed their usual groups. The Baku squad drifted toward Bakugo, Kirishima slinging his bag over one shoulder and asking if he was coming. Bakugo told them to go ahead. Kaminari winced and nudged Shiro, commenting that Bakugo was in a mood, and they left him standing near the back row. Slowly, Bakugo walked toward her desk. YN remained unmoving, facing forward, her head tilted subtly as if listening beyond the room. When she heard his approaching footsteps sharp, confident, her fingers twitched just slightly, but she did not lift her chin. Bakugo stopped beside her desk with his hands in his pockets and his jaw clenched. He called out a single rough word to get her attention and then told her it was time for lunch. She responded quietly. He ordered her to get up, and when she did not move, he muttered that he would not say it again. After a brief evaluation, she said she would follow. Bakugo snapped that she would not manage because she was blind and would crash into desks and walls. She insisted she would not. He accused her of being dumb. She reminded him she was not. He told her to shut up and stand. She rose slowly, wobbling just a little, a motion Bakugo noticed instantly. His hand shot out on instinct, almost grabbing her elbow, then froze. To avoid being too obvious or soft, he extended his arm slightly, not touching her, just offering it. He told her to take it. YN hesitated, then lifted her hand. Her fingers brushed his forearm lightly. She leaned in just a little, as if listening more closely to the world around her, drawn by the familiar presence beside her. Bakugo stiffened and asked what she was doing. She replied that it was nothing. When Bakugo said she had just leaned in, she denied it. He accused her of lying and she let her hand settle more firmly on his arm. His muscles tensed in reaction to the contact, and he looked away, cheeks faintly flushed beneath his scowl. She commented that his presence felt recognizable. Bakugo faltered, annoyed and embarrassed, and told her to just walk. He began forward and she followed, still holding his forearm with small, steady steps. He adjusted his stride almost without thinking to match her pace, neither too fast nor too slow. Students parted as they passed, whispering and wide-eyed at the sight of Bakugo guiding her with care. Kaminari and Shiro exchanged surprised murmurs. Mina squealed in delight, and Kirishima nearly cried out that Bakugo had grown as a person. Bakugo shot a hard glare at them mid-walk and warned them to be quiet, and they shut up, although the whispers continued elsewhere in the school. At the cafeteria entrance, Bakugo paused and asked if she was all right. She said she was fine. He told her to keep holding his arm because it would be crowded. She tightened her grip for stability. He adjusted his arm so it was easier for her to hold without anyone noticing, and she did notice. Inside the cafeteria, the noise was overwhelming, trays clattering, chairs scraping, dozens of conversations overlapping. Her grip faltered slightly and Bakugo felt it. He stepped closer, offering just enough presence to steady her. He told her to stay with him in a low voice. The words landed gently with her, and she agreed. He led her to a quieter corner away from the heaviest crowd. The Baku squad waved him over, but he ignored them. They sat down. She kept one hand lightly on his arm until her other hand found the table edge, then she let go. The ghost of her touch lingered. Bakugo cleared his throat and took out his bento with more force than needed, insisting that he was not hand-feeding her and that she should be able to eat by herself. She assured him she could. She reached forward slowly, feeling for the table space, and her hand bumped his bento. Bakugo swore softly, then reached to guide her hand gently toward her own lunch. For a moment they froze, his hand on her wrist and her breathing steadying. The world receded to background noise. Bakugo let go abruptly, embarrassed, and told her to eat. She thanked him quietly. The tone was neutral but sincere. Bakugo did not look at her while he ate, suppressing any urge to watch how her head angled slightly toward him when she listened, how she seemed steadier with him nearby. Halfway through the meal, she spoke again, mentioning how familiar his presence felt. Bakugo reacted with a grunt, uncomfortable and unsure how to respond to something so small and personal. She settled into the quiet of the cafeteria, eating carefully, and Bakugo kept a watchful, if reluctant, eye on her until they finished. YN said that it was calming. Bakugo nearly inhaled his rice and shouted in disbelief. YN insisted it was. Bakugo demanded to know why she would say something like that and told her not to talk nonsense out of nowhere. YN replied that it was not strange. Bakugo argued and turned away, his face bright red. She waited until he settled, then thanked him for guiding her. Bakugo's jaw clenched. He did not want to care, did not want gratitude, did not want to feel anything, but her words dug under his ribs and stayed there. He muttered that she should not get used to it. YN said she would not. He thought that was good, though the remark stung, and he clicked his tongue. They ate in silence for a moment. Then, very quietly, YN said that he smelled like caramel. Bakugo slammed his chopsticks on the table and snapped for her to stop saying that. She insisted it was true. He shouted that he did not care even if it was true. YN's lips twitched, not quite a smile but close. Bakugo looked away, muttering curses, but he did not move away from her. He did not tell her to find someone else to guide her, did not push her toward the Baku squad, did not leave her behind. He stayed. When lunch ended and the crowd thickened, Bakugo stood, moved beside her, and offered his arm again without a word. YN hesitated once, then took it. Chapter 19. Confrontation. The final bell rang. Chairs scraped, students chatted, bags were slung over shoulders. YN packed her things quietly, her movements precise and minimal, bandages still wrapped neatly around her eyes. She had hardly spoken all day, keeping the same cold, distant aura as always. The class began filing out. Uraraka gasped as she pushed open the giant door of Class 1A and announced that the hallway was swamped. Mineta asked what everyone was doing there as Bakugo rose beside him. Bakugo said they were scouting the competition as YN walked past them, and that they wanted to see the group who had come through the ambush before the big battle. He told the crowd that it was pointless to try and told them to clear the way. Ida scolded Bakugo not to call people extras right off the bat. YN, who had been zoning out, flinched at the sudden shouting as the noise cut through her thoughts. Bakugo clicked his tongue, already irritated, but YN moved first, her expression unreadable beneath the bandages. The class watched as she made her way into the hallway, footsteps soft but sure. The moment she stepped outside, she stopped and faced the loud voice. A student from Class B pointed at her dramatically and announced that he had come to hear about fighting villains directly because he had heard rumors. YN tilted her head slightly and repeated the phrase about being knocked around, her voice calm but cold. The Class B student froze. The rest of 1A peered from behind the doorway. YN took one slow step forward and asked if that was what he thought, whether fighting villains was a thrilling story to brag about. Her voice did not rise, but the hallway felt colder. She told him that yelling like it was exciting made it sound like being attacked was something to be proud of, and then, quietly, that it was not. Even without visible eyes, the weight behind her words was palpable. She described how terrifying it was. Loud, confusing, people screaming, people getting hurt. You did not know who would die next or whether you would. The Class B student swallowed. YN's voice remained steady as she said there was nothing cool about almost dying, nothing glamorous about watching a teacher get crushed in a fight, nothing exciting about feeling your body lock up. Because your quirk pushed it past its limits. She said she did not want praise for surviving, she just wanted it not to happen again. Silence fell. The Class B student lowered his hand, cheeks flushing with embarrassment, and muttered an apology before retreating. Bakugo appeared behind YN and dismissed them as idiots. Slow, measured footsteps approached. Shinso Hitoshi stopped in front of YN, his fists clenched. Bakugo straightened and demanded what he wanted, but Shinso ignored him, fixing his attention on YN. Shinso identified her as YN and, with a voice edged in resentment, accused her of being favored. He said the talk about how amazing Class 1A was did not convince him and that he did not buy her place in the hero course. YN's fingers paused on the strap of her bag as Shinso pressed on, arguing that she must have received her spot because of who she was related to and how she was treated differently. Bakugo bristled and warned Shinso to watch his mouth, but Shinso told him to be quiet and continued without looking at him. He said that he saw unfairness and suspected she had stolen a spot that should have gone to someone who had proven themselves. YN remained still and quiet. When Shinso asserted that she had been favored, he did so without hesitation. Bakugo stepped forward angrily and said that Shinso did not know anything about her. Shinso met his look with cold eyes and replied that he knew enough to see unfairness. He stepped back and told YN that she did not need to say anything, that her presence said enough. He turned away and walked down the hall, but paused and warned, over his shoulder, that they would see how far favoritism took her at the sports festival. His footsteps faded. Bakugo hissed in disbelief. An unseen student muttered that she was a stupid purple extra. YN did not respond. She simply stood there, blindfolded, still gripping her bag, as if the words had landed somewhere deep inside her whether she showed it or not. Chapter 20 Blurred Line, Sharp Edges. Locker Room, Pre-Sports Festival Scene. The locker room buzzed with restless excitement, benches scraping and uniforms rustling as Class 1A prepared for their debut. Sweat, nerves, and too loud chatter filled the space. YN sat at the end of the bench, adjusting the BLNDFLD wrapped around her head like a bandaged visor. She had removed it earlier to test her eyes enough to see shapes and movement, but the edges still blurred together like smeared watercolor. Still fuzzy, she thought, blinking slowly. At least she would not walk into walls this time. Denki leaned in from her left and whispered a nervous, teasing question, asking how many fingers he was holding up. Kirishima groaned and told Denki not to bother her, reminding him that she had almost died a few days ago. Denki held up his hand anyway, asking to be humored, but the hand looked like a vague blob to YN. She answered flatly that she saw 6, which made Denki sputter in disbelief and Kirishima laugh until his shoulders shook. For a moment, the tension melted into awkward comfort. YN blinked again. Still blurry but manageable. She pulled the BLNDFLD back down so it hid most of her unfocused eyes. She preferred people not notice her weakness. Kirishima asked if she was feeling okay, and she replied simply that she was not dying. He smiled and left it at that. The sliding locker room door opened. Todoroki stepped out, moving forward with a quiet, heavy presence that made the air feel colder even without his quirk. He ignored the room and walked straight to Midoriya, who froze mid-step. The chatter dropped away. Todoroki addressed Midoriya in a cool, measured tone, saying that on an objective basis he believed he was above him in practical strength. He noted that Midoriya had drawn All Might's attention and stated plainly that he intended to beat him. Then he turned his attention to YN and said that his father had flagged her as a potential threat during the sports festival. He told both of them that he was aiming for first place and would not hesitate to beat them. The room stiffened at the directness. Denki whispered that drama was starting and was promptly shushed by Kirishima. Midoriya looked shocked. YN felt the shift in the air and the way every breath around her tightened. Her fingers pressed slightly against her thigh, but she remained outwardly calm. Todoroki added that someone had told him YN fought like someone with life-or-death instincts. Midoriya asked about her quietly, but YN said nothing at first. She stood and moved toward Todoroki not with aggression but with a quiet, steady confidence that made him look directly at her. YN told him that he could focus on beating his father's expectations, but he should not make the mistake of comparing her to that standard. She said she did not care about Endeavor's attention or his, and that his warning did not change how she intended to compete. She asked him to fight as he wished, and she would do the same. She walked past him with deliberate calm, barely brushing his presence. Denki breathed an odd whisper that she had just asserted herself, and Kirishima quickly told him to be quiet. Todoroki did not respond aloud, but something in his expression shifted. Midoriya exhaled shakily as the moment settled. Kirishima urged Midoriya not to be negative. He reminded everyone that students from other departments were all aiming for the top, and that they could not afford to fall behind. The sentiment galvanized the group briefly. Present Mix's announcement over the speakers declared that the freshman stage had begun and that the students were making their entry. YN did not look back as she left the locker room. Her vision remained blurry, but her resolve was sharper than ever. He spiraled. He placed the ring in a tiny box, wrapped it in tissue, bubble wrap, and a sock, and then put it in his pocket like it was a sacred relic. He ran across town to bring it to YN at work. He showed up sweating and out of breath, stammering that she had forgotten it, that he had gotten worried, Not because he doubted her love but because he had worried a little. He stayed as her emotional support for the rest of the day. Kaminari Denki noticed the ring and squinted at it, picking it up and squinting harder as though trying to read a mystery. He wondered aloud to himself whether there had been a fight and whether he had lost. He walked around the apartment holding the ring like it might explode, then texted her with a teasing message asking if he was suddenly single, followed by a frantic follow-up begging her to come back because he missed her. He found a small Pokemon tin under the couch to carry the ring and brought it to her at work. Todoroki Shoto found the ring on her nightstand and stood silently, expressionless on the outside but internally alarmed. He studied the ring with the care of someone examining a rare artifact, wondering if it had been removed for reasons as trivial as an allergy or as serious as a separation. He stood in the doorway of her workplace holding the ring between two fingers and told her she had forgotten it. When she put it back on, he watched as if witnessing a sacred ritual and quietly admitted that he was relieved, having feared he might have to fight someone. Kirishima Aijiro gasped louder than any sane person should, panicking that she had rushed out or been hurt or been distracted. He snatched the ring and a bag of snacks just in case, and arrived at her workplace like a devoted knight presenting a treasure. He announced that he had kept it warm, beaming as he explained that his heart had done the warming. Ida Tenya went into committee-level panic when he picked up the ring, treating it like an emergency. He wrote himself a formal report, then sprinted to her workplace at top speed. He arrived in a blur of blue and glasses, bowed, and presented the ring with a lecture on exercising caution with valuable items in the future. She responded with a brief, respectful gesture to show her thanks, which flustered him. Shinso Hitoshi stared at the ring and declared himself abandoned, dramatically flopping onto the bed before sitting back up because he knew she was not leaving him. He teased the idea of pawning it before joking that he had put it on his own finger, claiming they were married twice. He went to her job wearing both rings and kept a smug expression the whole time. Monoma Nito treated the discovery like a telenovela, pacing and delivering a dramatic litany about a wife forgetting her symbol of love, then blaming it on a rival class. He showed up at her workplace holding the ring like a tragic prop, gave a full dramatic speech, and then cried a little over nothing. Tamaki Amajiki immediately assumed he had done something wrong when he saw the ring, retreating under a blanket and fretting about whether his breath or a comment had upset her. After she reassured him, he brought the ring to her later, red-faced and fidgety, and told her that although he knew it had been an accident, it had still scared him. A hug from her made him visibly relax. Mirio Togata thought it was cute that she had forgotten the ring and pocketed it, then set off to return it. He accidentally phased through several obstacles on the way but arrived cheerfully, presenting the ring as a grand Dielverwai. When she slid it back on, he returned the softest smile. Hawks woke up, saw the ring, and immediately began bombarding her with messages asking if everything was okay. He turned up at her workplace with coffee and the ring, teasingly asking for reassurance that all was well. She offered a short, affectionate gesture in response, and he relaxed. Dabi noticed the ring, laughed, pocketed it, and leaned in at her workplace like a smug observer. He held the ring up and demanded some form of payment before returning it. When she offered a brief, non-romantic reassuring gesture, he handed the ring back. Shigaraki Tamura panicked at the sight of the ring, worrying that someone had taken her or that she had disappeared. He tore the apartment apart for clues, found nothing but the ring, and then teleported with Kurogiri to her workplace, looking more stressed than menacing. He told her not to scare him like that again. She hugged him, and he softened though he pretended not to. Chapter 21 UA Sports Festival. Present Mick's voice boomed through the entire stadium as the crowd roared in excitement. He announced the UE Sports Festival and hyped the incoming students as the freshly formed miracle stars who had shrugged off a mass villain assault. The Department of Heroics freshman class drew the loudest cheers, followed by classes from general education and support, then management. YN winced and covered her ears against the cacophony while adjusting the bandages over her eyes. Despite the roaring crowd, she heard the click of heels and smelled a familiar perfume. Midnight arrived, commanding attention with her presence and reminding everyone to keep things appropriate for the event. She posed and grinned at the students, and the heroes in the bleachers murmured about her performance. She called for the player representative from Class 1A and announced Bakugo Katsuki and Aizawa YN as the chosen pair. YN walked toward the podium with Bakugo, processing the sudden turn of events and the intense energy in the stadium. Midoriya exclaimed that he understood YN, but questioned why it had to be Kaken. Zero reminded him that Bakugo had a high score on the entrance exam. Another student bitterly referred to the heroics entrance exam. Bakugo stepped forward, hands in his pockets, and declared that he would place first. The crowd responded with boos and shouted objections. Bakugo made a sharp, theatrical cutting motion across his throat. Before things escalated, YN stepped forward, placed her palm on Bakugo's head, and pressed it down like she was restraining a misbehaving animal. Bakugo snarled and struggled, but she did not look at him. YN introduced herself as YNLN, the secondary player representative, and said she wanted to add something before the situation became a full-scale public meltdown. The audience quieted. She sounded almost bored as she noted that Katsuki's confidence was loud and aggressive but not representative of the rest of Class 1A. The stadium chuckled and Bakugo grumbled under her hand. She continued that everyone had earned their place and that no one was a stepping stone. They were competitors, and the festival existed to showcase what made each person unique. Her tone became firmer as she said the crowd would see quirks, talents, strength, strategies, and perhaps a little chaos, which was normal. She asked the audience to be patient with Bakugo, explaining that his threatening tone was mostly his resting personality. The tension eased into laughter. Bakugo erupted in protest, but YN pushed his head down again without flinching. She finished by expressing hope that the festival would be enjoyable and that, preferably, no one would get hurt. The crowd laughed again. She released Bakugo and walked away while he fumed. Moved the event forward, signaling the start of the preliminaries and pointing to the big screen. The race was revealed to be an obstacle course, a long and demanding test of skill and stamina, and YN registered that it would be a roughly 4-kilometer challenge. Midnight gave the start signal and the competitors surged forward. Students launched themselves into motion with quirks, shouts, and determination. While most charged, YN walked calmly, composed as if on a morning jog. Present Mike reacted in astonishment at her composure, and Aizawa muttered that she always behaved that way. Presenters speculated and gaped, but Aizawa only observed that she had grown used to YN's calm. In the narrow tunnel the crowd compressed, quirks collided, and someone nearly became trapped. YN lifted a hand and her quirk, Null Genesis, hummed quietly. Small attacks dissolved around her, a blast vanished, Todoroki's frost evaporated, and Zero's tape went still. Commentators noted that the quirk neutralization was not attacking anyone, merely creating open space. Aizawa grumbled that she was like a walking signal jammer. Using the other students as stepping stones where needed, YN moved through the tunnel and emerged, undoing the nullification so others could resume their actions. Commentators announced that Todoroki and Aizawa had made it out, while some onlookers hurled taunts at them. Students pushed out of Todoroki's ice and scrambled to continue, and Todoroki tried to catch up with YN, who was tugging at her BLNDFLD. A student declared he was not buying Todoroki's supposed double bluff and attempted to use a move but was abruptly swept aside by a large metallic arm. Mineta was among those pushed out of the way. From the course's obstacle came an automated voice identifying multiple targets. The unexpected appearance of the Robo Inferno, the villain-type hurdle from the entrance exam, forced another sudden challenge. The pack surged toward the mechanical behemoth. YN slipped between competitors with precise, almost eerie steps, Null Genesis humming beneath her fingertips like a quiet storm. Commentators praised her, noting how she moved as if she had done this many times. The Robo Inferno loomed ahead, a towering machine that spewed intense heat and stomped forward, its furnace core glowing molten. Students scattered as it unleashed a wave of scorching force. Todoroki stepped forward, preparing frost, but YN moved first with an instant, controlled acceleration. Each footfall was deliberate. Bakugo watched in growing panic as she charged directly at the machine. The Robo Inferno lowered its blazing cannon and released a stream of fire aimed straight at her. YN lifted her hand. A black, shimmering distortion rippled from her palm and spread like cracks in the air. Her quirk, Null Genesis, manifested as arc nullification. The flame struck the distortion and blinked out of existence. There was no explosion, no smoke, just a stunned silence as the attack was erased. Spectators realized that she had nullified the blast outright. This was the nature of her quirk. It was not something to brute force through. The Robo-Inferno adjusted instantly and switched strategies. It stomped forward, raising a massive steel fist to crush her. Wyan did not flinch. She stepped in and let her fingertips brush the robot's plated armor. The metal shuddered where she touched it. The steel lost its shine as colors seemed to drain away. The effect read as Null Genesis, structural reset. The integrity of the armor collapsed. A wave of nullification crawled across the machine like a grayscale fire, unraveling bolts and loosening joints. The Robo-Inferno staggered, systems glitching, movements jerky. Yn murmured a single command to herself to break the structure. The robot folded in on itself as its internal supports dissolved and crashed down in a smoking heap just inches from her. She stepped past it untouched and calm, not even breathing hard. Todoroki observed that she had neutralized it before he could even act. Bakugo clicked his tongue and declared that he would not lose. Midoriya murmured that her quirk was incredible, noting that she had erased the robot's internal structure entirely as he watched Yn start to run away. Present Mike announced loudly that Yn Aizawa had taken down a zero-point robot like a stack of cardboard and described it as terrifying. Aizawa remarked that she was still pacing herself and had not used even half her potential. The crowd erupted. Yn did not look back at the fallen machine. She dusted her hands off, expression unreadable, and continued running as if deleting a giant robot were just another morning exercise, aloof and controlled. Todoroki froze the robot's feet and ran past them, warning the other students not to follow because he had left them precarious so they would crash. At his signal, the robots toppled. Present Mike announced that Todoroki had forged ahead and blocked the others in one sweep, calling the move harsh.Yn's footsteps echoed across broken concrete as she sprinted away from the wreckage of the Robo-Inferno. She did not look back. She exhaled through her nose and wiped a smear of dust from her cheek with 2 fingers. She reached the edge of the next obstacle, a massive canyon called the Fall, before anyone else. Unstable pillars and floating debris framed a 20-meter drop that punished mistakes. Present Mike boomed that Yn had arrived at the Fall first and that Null Genesis was proving to be a monster quirk. Aizawa muttered through the mic system that she was going too fast. Yn sighed. Of course he would say that. She bent her knees, preparing to jump. Bakugo launched up behind her with explosions cracking the air. Todoroki slid across ice beside him, cool and precise. Ida's engines roared as he accelerated. They arrived in a burst of sound and color, and Yn realized she was no longer alone. She stepped off the cliff. Air rushed past her ears and students gasped. A small, shimmering platform of distorted black static appeared under her foot, a thin glitch-like ripple of erased gravity she called Null Step. She pushed off it and created another, then another. Each platform appeared only for a heartbeat before dissolving like pixels fading from a screen. Her heartbeat remained calm and her expression blank. Present Mike announced that she was making her own handmade air steps and marveled at it. Todoroki paused mid-jump and noted that she was stabilizing gravity temporarily. Bakugo demanded that she stop doing weird reality-breaking things and aimed an insult at her hair, which she ignored. Null Genesis was not meant for long-distance precision. It flickered and was unstable. She could only erase gravity in small bursts. The further she progressed, the more the platforms trembled. 20 steps in, the platform under her left foot vanished too early and she dropped a meter. Her stomach lurched as wind clawed at her. She pressed her palm downward and told the air to stop. Her falling momentum was erased for a fraction of a second and she landed on the next pillar with a soft thud. She bent her knees, steadied her breathing, and narrowed her eyes, calling the setback annoying. By the time she stabilized, Todoroki had already leaped ahead, forming clean, sharp ice paths. Ida sped across a thin line of debris with perfect footwork. Bakugo blasted from rock to rock like an angry firework. They drew ahead and YN silently cursed gravity, physics, and herself for not practicing longer-distance nulling. As another pillar crumbled beside her, a chunk of stone fell toward her head. She brushed it with 2 fingers. The boulder turned hollow and weightless, drifting like styrofoam. Nearby students gawked and marveled at how she erased the weight. She ignored them. The last path was collapsing quickly and she had seconds. YN inhaled once and made a decision. She erased friction under her feet and shot forward, sliding across crumbling debris like skating on invisible ice. Pillars shattered behind her as she streaked ahead in a straight line. Her hair whipped in the wind and null sparks flickered around her socks. Her expression never changed, not even when she almost veered off the cliff and had to nullify gravity again to readjust. Present Mike declared her the new favorite student for sliding across midair like that. Aizawa told him not to be biased. The slide ended just before she reached solid land and she stumbled slightly, enough for Bakugo, Todoroki, and Ida to gain a real lead. She stepped onto the ground with breath lightly uneven but face unreadable. She blinked once and noted that she had fallen behind, then started running again as if none of the chaos behind her existed. Chapter 23 Last Obstacle and the Cavalry Battle. The hidden final barrier revealed itself as a minefield, a checkerboard of uneven dips, loose soil, and too many suspicious circles half buried in the dirt. The ground rumbled every few seconds from someone unlucky enough to step wrong. YN arrived at the starting edge a bit later than most. She ignored the students who recklessly stepped on the mines and paused to form a plan for how to cross using her quirk. She ordered them to move and dropped slightly to avoid Bakugo as he rocketed past using his explosions, shouting that it meant nothing to him as he passed Todoroki. She watched 2 students fighting to pass by each other and then noticed Midoriya carefully digging around the landmines without triggering them, using metal scrap from the Robo Inferno to gather the mines. Midoriya rammed the gathered metal into the assembled mines, mounting his charge. The resulting explosion was loud and sent him flying. Present Mike shouted that he had never seen anything like it, that someone had overtaken them, and the stadium erupted in energy. Todoroki, Bakugo, and Midoriya were already halfway across the field while other students scattered behind them in varying degrees of confidence and panic. She blinked slowly, her vision still not perfect, edges blurring, colors faintly smearing together. Present Mike announced the arrival of the so-called mini Aizawa and wondered if she would tiptoe or treat the minefield like a mock exam. She ignored him. She crouched, pressed her palm lightly to the ground, and activated her quirk, Null Genesis, Domain Reduce. A subtle pulse distorted the air around her feet, not erasing the mines but dampening the immediate area to reduce explosive force. She took one careful step. A mine popped, but instead of a blast it sputtered like a cheap party cracker. She nodded in satisfaction and considered the progress acceptable. She continued step by step, cautious and controlled. The mines still went off but were reduced to little bursts of air. It was neither flashy nor fast, but it worked. Nearby students watched with a mix of confusion and awe, whispering questions about how she could walk through them without jumping and what sort of quirk control that represented. She ignored them all. Halfway through, she glanced ahead. Todoroki glided on ice, Bakugo propelled himself using explosions, and Midoriya rode a scrap of metal. She blinked, unimpressed, and decided to imitate the scrapboard approach. She crouched beside a half-buried metal sheet and slapped a hand onto it, activating Null Genesis, Zero Impulse Surge. The metal plate vibrated and shot forward. She stepped onto it and balanced despite its dangerous wobble. A mine ignited beneath the plate and detonated, but her quirk translated the blast into a smooth gliding boost rather than launching her. Present Mike lost his composure and praised her for surfing the minefield with cool-headed control. Students shouted in disbelief as she zoomed past several of them, maintaining near-perfect balance. Her makeshift board nearly flipped once, and she sighed, stabilizing her trajectory with another pulse of Null Genesis. The final stretch approached. The top 3 were already ahead, but she had closed the gap. She pushed the board farther when another explosion flipped her in midair. She reacted instantly, twisting and landing in a neat crouch with one hand pressed to the ground to dampen the aftershock. She admitted to herself that it had not been ideal, then sprinted the last distance. Mines hissed and popped beneath her as she nullified each one with millisecond precision. Dust burst behind her and shouts echoed around the track, praising the festival's chaos. An announcer proclaimed the returning triumph of Midoriya Izuku and declared that his name would be remembered. She crossed the finish line moments after Todoroki, Bakugo, and Midoriya. Aizawa had placed fourth. She slowed, brushed dust off her sleeves, and breathed out. Fourth place was acceptable, she decided, and she walked off with the same aloof expression as if she had not just mind-surfed the stadium's most chaotic obstacle. The event organizers revealed the results and explained that the top 42 had earned the right to advance. They apologized to those who did not make it and teased that the festival's showstopper was still being prepared. Midnight introduced the next game, Cavalry Battle, and the points for each student were announced, with Midoriya awarded 10 million points. YN looked at the shaking boy beside her with a pitiful expression and felt the glares directed at him. When Midnight shouted "Pick your teams," chaos exploded across the arena. Students scrambled, shouting names, forming alliances, and begging the strongest to join them. A crush formed around YN as if both the general education and Hero Corps students had decided she was the ultimate prize. Numerous students called out that their strategy needed her, that she would be wasted on anyone else, and urged her to come with them. Others asked about the name of her quirk with genuine confusion. YN stood expressionless, eyes half-lidded in silent exhaustion. She had just survived being chased, blasted, frozen, and nearly electrocuted in the obstacle race, and now this circus surrounded her. She told them to move, but no one seemed to hear. Bakugo stepped forward and snapped that she was with him and should not slow him down. Todoroki argued that it would be logical for her to join his team. Midoriya offered her a kind invitation. Her annoyance finally spiked. She inhaled, lifted one hand, and a silent wave of pressure rippled outward. It was not an attack, just a firm, invisible shove that forced the circle back a step, giving her enough space to breathe and think. She turned to the quiet figure leaning against the fence, Hitoshi Shinso, the one person who had not tried to swarm her or demand her allegiance. He watched with a tired, mildly amused expression. YN walked straight toward him, shoulders squared and boots crunching on the dirt, and the crowd parted around her like a storm passing through. She stopped in front of Shinso and told him that he should take her onto his team. He blinked and pointed to himself, clearly surprised. She clarified that she was not asking but telling him. He needed a strong frontrunner, and she needed a team that was not full of the bickering type behind them. Shinso's lips twitched into a slow smile, and he remarked that he liked her style. She said that was good, because she would be the one in charge. He raised an eyebrow at the idea of being driven, and before he could question it further she grabbed his sleeve decisively and pulled him toward the forming teams. He protested, but he also ran a hand through his messy purple hair, stunned yet impressed. He agreed to join her but warned that she should not regret choosing him. YN glanced at him, her eyes sharp but with an odd warmth, and said that if she planned on regretting it she would not have chosen him. Team Shinso, YN was officially formed quiet, underestimated, and already frighteningly efficient. The perfect storm. YN pointed at the dazed teammates and poked Ojiro's shoulder, frowning when he did not react. Shinso noted them standing in a haze and told her not to worry, then began outlining a plan. They gathered behind a tall pillar where the stadium's shadows kept the crowd at bay. The air vibrated with teams forming and calling out tactics. YN stood dead center, posture neutral and expression unreadable as always. Shinso lingered beside her, slightly nervous. Ojiro stood at her left, rigid and alert. The extra teammates stood at her right, stiff and staring blankly ahead. Anyone with functioning social sense would have noticed something was off. Shinso thought that aloud, but YN only observed that the group seemed disciplined and approved. Shinso cleared his throat and emphasized that they needed a plan that guaranteed survival, that they should not aim for first place or chase the million points. YN nodded and said she did not want unnecessary attention. Ojiro offered a robotic affirmative when asked to take the flank, and the extra teammate replied mechanically to take the right for symmetry. Shinso winced at their unnervingly synchronized responses. YN took it as a sign of cooperation. Shinso stepped behind YN, placing his hands lightly on her shoulders as he climbed into position and stated that he would be the rider, keeping watch for approaching teams while she focused on mobility. When both supports voiced their agreement in unison, Shinso instructed them to stop copying and explained that only YN had permission to confirm commands. YN tilted her head in mild confusion and remarked that they were being very cooperative. Shinso could only suppress a groan. He tried to sound composed and outline the plan more concretely. They would avoid clusters and stay near the edge, with YN setting the course. YN affirmed she would stay away from noise and promised to create distance if anyone tried to grab their headbands by jumping. Shinso registered the strategy and Ojiro stated he would support the center of gravity while the extra teammate would stabilize, both in the same detached manner. YN accepted the arrangement, and Shinso rubbed his temples at how unaware she was of the other's condition. The stadium announcer called out that the cavalry battle would begin in 3 minutes, and the crowd exploded into cheers. Shinso tightened his grip on YN's shoulders and reminded the team that there must be no unnecessary fights or heroics. YN agreed, reiterating that they were just getting by. She then gestured for them to begin and they fell into motion, Ojiro balancing effortlessly at her side, the extra teammate mirroring perfectly, and Shinso steady on her back. YN led confidently and focused, none of them hesitated. To everyone watching, their movements were the smoothest and most coordinated in the tunnel. YN, however, only registered the fact that this team would survive with her directing, Shinso controlling the battlefield, and the 2 support members following precisely. The countdown began. The announcer counted down the final seconds and YN dug her shoes into the rink. Shinso told her to hold tight as she crouched and braced the team. When the starters signaled the beginning, everyone surged toward the 1 million points and the battlefield erupted into dust, shouting, and explosions. YN kept the team gliding through the chaos like a needle slipping through fabric. She functioned as the driver and the eyes. Shinso sat steady and scanned the field with sharp calculation, and Ojiro and the extra support moved without hesitation, adjusting weight and balance perfectly. Shinso called out that the target was to their right and that 2 medium-point headbands would be enough to pass. YN confirmed and leaned into motion. She launched forward, the force sending a small tremor through the dirt. Teams scrambled as she zigzagged, moving with frightening speed and precision. A Class B cavalry turned too late. YN slid low, then sprang upward, lifting Shinso high so he could reach and take a headband cleanly. The announcers reacted with surprise and amusement at the odd but effective team from Class 1A. Shinso tucked the headband away and noted they still needed more points. He identified a target 10 meters ahead that had 2 headbands. YN moved without hesitation, twisting her body and propelling the formation through tape whips and a burst of explosions. Her footwork was clean, sharp, and swift. Bakugo's team panicked as she approached. YN leapt, the cavalry rising with her as she kicked and spun in midair. Shinso reached again and took 2 more headbands as they landed lightly, dust kicking up behind them. Bakugo shouted angrily at his team and berated Kirishima, who remained unfazed, and threatened to settle things with the intruding team later. Shinso checked their combined points and confirmed they were in the safe range. YN asked if they should take anything extra. Shinso declined, saying they did not want attention and only needed to survive. Relief passed briefly across YN's face. Other teams began to notice their mobility and 2 groups closed in from both sides, attempting to box them in. YN exhaled and said she disliked being boxed. Shinso assessed the left group as weak and directed them to go through that side as an easy pick. YN accelerated, channeling her quirk through her legs to absorb and release momentum. The ground flexed beneath her as she darted toward the left cavalry, ducked under a grab, and swept a leg outward to disrupt their balance. Shinso took another headband cleanly from the stumbling support, scoring more than enough points. YN called for a slowdown and told the group they were done taking headbands for now. Shinso confirmed and instructed them to keep moving without engaging further. They fell into a steady, guarded run, staying in a safer corridor while periodically checking the scoring boards. They kept moving until they could pause and watch the wider fighting. The broadcast announced that Todoroki had acquired the 1,000,000 points, and the stadium roared in reaction. The team remained vigilant, breathing and steady, ready to keep themselves safe until the end. Midoriya crashed back to zero. They spent the remaining time avoiding fights, weaving through the battlefield without losing a single headband and even snatching one when another team slipped up. YN pointed out that Bakugo was flying, and Shinso smirked, betting he would not snatch the band in time. The others agreed with quiet confidence. Midnight blew her final whistle and announced the top 4. Team Todoroki took first place, Team Bakugo came in second, and Team Shinso placed high enough to qualify without ever chasing the 1,000,000. YN exhaled and dropped to her knees the second they stopped moving. Shinso hopped off and asked if she was okay. She muttered that she was not and complained that he was heavy. He teased that she was short. He smirked as he released his quirk toward the other two, who looked around in confusion. They had qualified, clean, quiet, efficient, exactly as they had planned. Lunch at UA was usually loud and chaotic, but YN found herself sitting with the girls of Class 1A Momo, Ochako, Mina, Jairu, and Tsu simply because she had sat at the table first and they had gathered around her. She poked at her katsudon while listening half-heartedly to Mina's excited rant about costume upgrades. Mina described wanting something flashy, and the others reacted with polite disagreement or amusement. Jairu muttered that sparkles were unlikely, Momo laughed. Tsu found sparkles impractical, and Ochako imagined Mina spinning like a disco ball. YN took another silent bite, not inclined to argue. For a rare moment, the table felt peaceful. Kaminari and Mineta arrived. Kaminari slid into the seat beside YN with a rehearsed grin and a practiced charm, while Mineta climbed onto the bench with anxious energy. Jairu shoved her earphones in and thwacked Mineta on the head with her lunch tray when he started to speak. YN interrupted Mineta's clumsy attempt to join their conversation with a blunt refusal. Mina snorted into her drink and Ochako laughed until she had to cover her mouth. Kaminari pretended to be wounded by YN's coldness, and she replied flatly that it suited her. Momo tried to smooth things over and explain that they were in the middle of a conversation, but Kaminari slid his chair closer anyway. The whole table said no in unison, and the two boys backed off, startled. Lunch continued with Kaminari failing to charm anyone, Mineta nursing his bruised ego, and YN eating in calm detachment. Kaminari and Mineta then tried to recruit the girls for a post-lunch activity, pointing out the cheerleaders they had brought in from abroad. Kaminari mentioned that Aizawa would handle the arrangements, and the two boys left with puffed chests as if satisfied with themselves. Mina and Momo then guided YN toward the locker room. Before the final event, an announcement told the remaining participants that a recreational activity had been prepared and that cheerleaders had been brought in to energize the crowd. The stadium buzzed with curiosity and confusion at the sudden change in schedule. Class 1A stood frozen and betrayed as the idea of performing with the cheerleaders was unveiled. YN remained deadpan and rigid, turning a dark look toward Kaminari and Mineta, who were snickering and awkwardly avoiding eye contact. She raised a hand to activate her quirk in warning. The two boys hurriedly begged for a chance to explain, and the moment passed. The announcer then introduced a formal tournament, a series of one-on-one battles. Ojiro raised his hand and asked to withdraw, explaining that he could not remember much of the cavalry battle and suspected his own quirk or an outside quirk had caused the gaps. He avoided Shinsu's gaze while he spoke. Another teammate echoed the same concern and withdrew as well. Midoriya insisted to YN that he was completely fine, but the shifts in participation left an uneasy ripple through the class. The coordinators and the crowd watched the turns of events with interest. Midnight surveyed them with a dark, amused expression, cracked her whip in the air, and admitted that she liked the unfolding drama. YN's eyes drifted to the tournament bracket and she noted that her opponent was a Shido, stating it as if reading an ordinary fact. Mina bounced beside her, glowing with excitement, and urged her to do well, using the common encouragement that one should break a leg. YN blinked slowly, genuinely confused by the expression, and Mina tried to explain that it was just an idiom of good luck. YN continued to study Mina with the blank, unblinking scrutiny she usually reserved for puzzles, trying to determine whether this enthusiastic remark had been a threat or a cheer. A bystander asked if they needed medical assistance. Mina waved her arms frantically and explained that no, it meant good luck. YN nodded calmly and observed that it was a strange custom. YN escaped behind the food stalls like a fugitive fleeing glitter-related attention. Her cheerleader ribbon kept slipping over her eyes, her skirt swished with every frustrated step, and she clutched takoyaki as if it were life support. Peace arrived at last, until she saw someone already there, crouched near the wall and half in shadow. Todoroki looked up when he heard her footsteps and asked if it was really her. YN stared back blankly and noted that it was him, letting the ribbon slide further down her forehead without fixing it. Todoroki assessed her outfit's sparkly skirt, pom-poms, limp ribbon, tired stare and remarked that she was dressed differently today. YN replied that it had been a group decision, speaking as though announcing a minor tragedy. He made a soft exhale that served as a laugh. She sat down beside him and asked if he was hiding too. Todoroki answered that he was not hiding, only thinking. When she asked what he was thinking about, Todoroki looked toward the stadium and said that he wanted to show everyone, especially his father, that he could win on his own terms without using his fire. YN blinked slowly and recognized family issues. She offered him a piece of takoyaki for emotional stability, and he accepted it with a small nod and thanked her. YN told him he needed it because he had looked serious, and he admitted he was serious, focused rather than worried. She chewed thoughtfully and affirmed that he would win. Todoroki was surprised by her confidence and asked if she really thought so. YN replied simply that he was tall, and he said that had nothing to do with it. She insisted it helped, and he chuckled and shook his head. The ribbon finally fell off YN's head and she did not bother to pick it up. Todoroki retrieved it and returned it, commenting that it did not suit her. She agreed and explained that they had been excited, so she had worn it. Todoroki called that considerate and she blinked, unsure how to accept genuine praise. Silence settled between them. YN stood and announced she should go back before the others tracked her using girl instincts. Todoroki offered to walk with her because he wanted to. She blinked and accepted. They walked off side by side, YN glittery and exhausted, Todoroki calm and determined. Unnoticed behind a stack of crates, Bakugo Katsuki watched them. He had trailed her earlier and seen Todoroki eating the takoyaki she had given him, Todoroki picking up her ribbon, and Todoroki walking beside her. Bakugo's eye twitched as he muttered that Todoroki thought he was smooth now, glaring until they disappeared from view. He wondered aloud why she was feeding him takoyaki and stomped off, annoyed. The stadium thundered with cheers as UA's sports festival moved into the tournament battles. Present mix commentary kept the energy high, announcing that the first 4 matches had been incredible and naming the recent victors. The crowd chanted rhythmically, already hyped for the next round. In the waiting tunnel, YN sat on a bench with her usual deadpan expression. Her eyes were free from the bandage, though slightly blurry, and she carried a quiet confidence. Mina bounced excitedly across from her, doing stretches like a pink rubber ball and announcing that they were up next. YN offered a slow thumbs up and explained that she conserved energy. Mina blew kisses and hurried off, waving goodbye. The announcer hyped the next match, introducing YN as the girl who had made a shocking entrance in the obstacle race, finishing 4th aloof, deadpan, and calculated and naming Ishido Mina as her opponent. YN walked into the arena with the calm of someone going to buy groceries, her slightly clouded eyes reflecting the sunlight. Spectators commented that her vibe was intense but mellow, unsure if she was confident or simply tired. In the red corner, Mina pumped her fists and performed for the audience. Other students watched nervously. Uraraka thought Ishido looked pumped. Kaminari said Ishido would need that energy against YN. Midoriya noted that YN's quirk was not fully recovered but that she was calculating and would use minimal output, and Bakugo crossed his arms and scoffed, telling others to watch closely. In the staff section, Aizawa watched the arena with folded arms. Cementos murmured that she should not push herself too hard, while Midnight smirked and reminded them that she was Shuta's child and would probably be fine. When the match began, Mina dashed forward, sliding across the arena with acid-coated boots and apologizing to YN for going all out. YN tilted her head and acknowledged it before lifting a hand. Her pulse steadied and a faint white ripple shimmered around her fingertips as her quirk, Null Genesis, activated. Mina sprayed a tactical arc of slow-acting acid to limit movement, but the acid evaporated midair the moment it entered YN's ripple. Mina reacted in surprise and then used a burst of high-concentration acid to propel herself like a rocket, attempting to flank YN in a wide circle. YN observed the speed trick and expanded Null Genesis a meter farther. Acid trails sizzled and dissolved on contact. Mina leapt high to attack from behind, but YN stepped aside by a small measured pace, relying on sound and pressure because of her blurry vision. Mina landed sliding with palms coated in acid and insisted she had to win. YN lifted one finger and sent a pulse that neutralized the acid. Steam puffed from Mina's palms and she froze. YN placed that same finger lightly on Mina's forehead and stated no more acid. Mina protested that she still had legs and kicked, but YN dodged by leaning back exactly 7 centimeters. The crowd laughed at the precision while YN remained expressionless and praised Mina's fighting spirit. YN admitted she wanted takoyaki, which elicited a groan from Mina. YN told Mina that she could at least pretend to be scary. Mina pointed out that YN was pink. YN wondered how that was related. YN gently tapped Mina's shoulder with a Null Genesis pulse, throwing Mina off balance just enough for YN to guide her toward the line and give a soft shove. Mina stepped out of bounds. The announcer declared Ishido Mina out of bounds and YNL and the winner. The crowd erupted in cheers. Mina landed on her but with a defeated sigh. YN extended a hand and Mina took it with a grin, saying that YN was so cool but so mean at the same time. YN responded with a flat thank you, and Mina clarified that it had not been a compliment. Midnight observed that YN was terrifying in the gentlest way possible, while another voice compared it to being politely struck down. Aizawa sighed and noted that at least YN had not overused her quirk this time. The stadium lights flared as the announcer introduced the next match, Fumikage Tokoyami vs Momo Yaoyorozu. YN opened a pudding cup and sat in the Class 1A bleachers beside Jairu and Ishido, leaning forward just enough to watch the arena while carefully protecting her snack. Dark Shadow roared dramatically and Momo materialized a shield in an instant. The opening clash was powerful, the follow-up strategic, and the sequence soon became chaotic. Jairu commented that the duel felt like a chess match with explosions. Mina asked if YN was rooting for anyone. YN replied that she was rooting for the pudding while her eyes tracked every move. Tokoyami pushed aggressively, Momo countered with rapid creations, and Dark Shadow threatened to overwhelm her defense. In the end, Tokoyami pulled ahead and won. YN blinked and pretended she had seen it coming, though she had been focused on the pudding. The announcer called the next match, Tetsu vs Kirishima. The two contestants entered the arena, fists pumped and shouting. YN opened a new snack and remarked to herself that they were the metallic himbas. The match began with a series of clangs as metal met rock, followed by many more in quick succession. Ishido cheered for Ijiro while Jur teased that they were practically the same person. YN held up a finger to point out that Kirishima had slightly better hair. The clash kicked up dust, both boys suddenly stiffened, and then they collapsed face first and unconscious at the same time. The judges called it a draw. YN popped popcorn into her mouth and observed that their synchronized stupidity was impressive. The stadium buzzed as Bakugo faced Uraraka. Some pro-heroes in the stands whispered judgmental comments, and a group in the crowd began booing. The commentator winced as an elbow hit a mic, and the crowd's negativity grew. Aizawa's monotone voice cut through the noise to admonish the spectators, reminding them that Uraraka had earned her place and that Bakugo's intense caution showed he recognized her as a worthy opponent. Those who had been mocking shrank back, chastened. YN murmured to her popcorn that the crowd was immature and praised Uraraka's maneuver. Uraraka shouted that she was going to win and launched a meteor storm-like barrage. Bakugo calmly raised his arm and blasted straight through the floating debris. Uraraka rolled away and watched in horror as Bakugo cleared her trick with a single attack. She charged at him, but fatigue caught up and she collapsed. Midnight announced that Uraraka was unable to continue and that Bakugo would move on to the second round. Bakugo had outplayed her. YN tossed another popcorn kernel into her mouth, missed, and watched it bounce off her cheek while staring up as if the ceiling had betrayed her. Later, Suro teased Bakugo about the rough match and Kaminari and others kept poking fun. Bakugo stomped over and dropped into the seat beside YN, arms crossed and muscles tense. He made an irritated sound. YN blinked, then nudged her popcorn bucket toward him and offered some. Bakugo glared at the bucket, then grabbed a handful and ate it with the same aggressive energy he used in battle. YN nodded once in silent approval and returned to watching the matches. Bakugo stayed hunched beside her, grumbling but not moving away, and continued eating her popcorn. After the medical bots hauled the arm wrestlers back to consciousness, Kirishima and Tetsu returned to settle their draw with an arm wrestling mash. They slammed their elbows down and pushed with a roar. YN leaned forward only to grab a gummy worm that had fallen under the seat and muttered a hope that they did not snap their arms. Kirishima won. The stadium erupted and YN raised her drink in a lazy toast, congratulating Spiky Hair. She leaned back, crossed her arms behind her head, and relaxed as the crowd surged with noise. Her own fight was coming soon, but she remained laid back, prioritizing snacks over worry for the moment. Later, in the quiet hallway under the stadium lit by vending machines, YN stood in front of one that refused to respond to her button presses. After tapping the machine and trying again, she felt a heavy, suffocating presence behind her. Heat rolled across her back and she turned slowly to look up at the towering figure of Endeavor. He stood with arms crossed and flames crackling along his shoulders, studying her. Endeavor identified her as Aizawa's adoptive daughter and YN nodded. He stepped closer and noted her performance in the obstacle race and the nature of her quirk, Null Genesis. Endeavor observed that she was holding back. YN blinked, unsure whether the conversation had started or if he was simply scolding her for existing. She motioned that she was just trying to buy juice. He instead noted that she demonstrated high combat intuition, power, and potential, and that individuals like her did not appear often. YN fed the bill into the machine with a look that showed she did not know how to respond to the compliment. Endeavor inhaled as if preparing for something important, then made an inappropriate suggestion involving his son. YN reacted with disbelief and left. YN sat beside Bakugo in the bleachers, munching calmly on her chips as if this were an ordinary afternoon rather than one of the festival's most explosive matches. Bakugo sat rigid, arms crossed, eyes narrowed like blades. Present Mike announced the match. YN blinked and observed that Midoriya was likely to sustain serious injuries. Bakugo grunted that Midoriya always went all out, even when he could not handle it. The fight began. Todoroki's ice froze half the stadium while Midoriya countered with it. Desperate, precise maneuver using a finger to blunt the attack. YN tilted her head and noted that using such a small adjustment to minimize damage was impressive, and that the fighters were being very dramatic. Bakugo snapped that she was one to talk, referencing an old incident, and YN thought for a moment before acknowledging the reminder. Todoroki's assault was relentless. Midoriya took multiple hits and his hands were clearly injured, but he pushed on. Kirishima arrived at the bleachers, greeted his friends, and announced that he was up against Bakugo next. Bakugo laughed and challenged him to give everything he had. YN murmured that such determination would get someone hurt one day as she watched Midoriya struggle under the onslaught. Midoriya shouted that his power belonged to him, and moments later Todoroki's fire flared to life, bringing the crowd to its feet. YN sipped her drink and commented that Todoroki had finally used his fire. Bakugo choked on his surprise and leaned forward, eyes gleaming. He claimed that if he were down there both fighters would already be out. YN agreed, noting that he yelled a lot. Bakugo snapped that he did not know why he sat next to her. She replied that he had sat there by choice. Bakugo was baffled and irritated by Todoroki's sudden use of fire, and the smoke cleared to reveal Todoroki's other side erupting into flames. The audience roared as the two clashed again. An intense barrage followed, and the faculty sprang into action when they sensed danger. Teachers moved in and activated their quirks to keep the fighters and crowd safe. When the final clash occurred, fire and ice detonating in a blinding burst, YN instinctively shielded her soda with both hands. She commented flatly that they could destroy the whole stadium. As the dust settled, Todoroki was declared the winner and Midoriya was out of bounds. The crowd murmured. Bakugo clicked his tongue and said he would split his effort and make use of any advantage he could. YN calmly asked him not to break anything. He glared and told her not to tell him what to do. She handed him another chip, which he took begrudgingly and ate. Ida's match wrapped up faster than YN expected, a display of speed and strategy that pushed his opponent out of bounds. Present Mike shouted Ida's victory with flair. YN sipped her drink and called the match predictable, noting that vines had their limits. Before she could relax, the stadium screen flashed her name. Her next match would be against Tokoyami Fumikage. YN registered that the announcement was for her. Bakugo glanced at her and told her to get going, warning her not to lose to Tokoyami. YN said she had no intention of losing and asked him to hold her snacks. When he objected, she dumped her chips and drink into his arms and walked off. The ring felt heavier than the bleachers. Tokoyami stood across from her, posture calm and noble, Dark Shadow coiling behind him like a living storm. Dark Shadow greeted her with a teasing remark about her scent and danger, and YN blinked at Tokoyami to ask whether Dark Shadow always spoke that way. Tokoyami explained that Dark Shadow was expressive and instructed her to pay him no mind. Dark Shadow leaned forward and questioned Tokoyami's certainty about the match. A spectator observed that she looked like she could blow up a mountain. YN answered honestly that she could. Dark Shadow exclaimed that the proof was obvious. Tokoyami sighed deeply. Present Mike announced that the battle would begin. Dark Shadow lunged, fast and powerful, aiming to push her out of bounds with a sweeping strike. YN did not move. She stepped aside with calm precision, letting Dark Shadow's arm cut through empty air. Tokoyami noted that her reactions were sharp. YN replied bluntly that she did not like getting hit. She flicked her wrist lightly and activated her quirk. A thin burst of concussive force rippled outward, not enough to injure but enough to send Dark Shadow stumbling backward with a surprised cry. Tokoyami explained that she had used her quirk, clearly impressed. YN narrowed her eyes and began analyzing him, his stance, his distance, how Dark Shadow reacted to impacts and light. Aloof on the surface, she was already dissecting the fight. Tokoyami ordered Dark Shadow to pressure her and not give her time to plan. Dark Shadow darted forward again, orbiting and trying to trap her movement. YN waited, then stomped the ground. A tight, controlled burst of force pushed under her feet and launched her upward and outward in a smooth arc midair. She twisted, landed behind Tokoyami, and tapped the ground again with barely their energy that created a sharp gust. The gust threw Tokoyami slightly off balance. Dark Shadow panicked and called Tokoyami's name. Tokoyami steadied himself just in time to see YN raise her hand, palm glowing. She stated simply that she was done. A directional burst of force swept forward, not aimed directly at Tokoyami's body but designed to sweep his legs and Dark Shadow together in a single controlled push. The force pushed them gently but inevitably out of bounds. Dust settled and silence followed. Then Present Mike announced YN of Class 1A as the winner. Chapter 28 YN vs Bakugo. YN walked back up the stadium stairs with the same calm expression she always wore. The crowd still roared over her last move, but she ignored it. Bakugo, who had been holding her snacks, shoved them back into her arms the moment she sat down and complained that she had taken too long. She blinked and grabbed a chip, noting that she had won. Bakugo clicked his tongue but did not deny it. Kirishima leaned across the seats and praised the move as manly, describing it with energetic gestures. YN corrected him that she had not caused an explosion. Kirishima grinned and insisted it was still manly. Present Mike then announced the next match, Kirishima Eijiro vs Bakugo Katsuki. Kirishima rose with determination and told Bakugo he would not hold back. Bakugo cracked his neck and warned that he would push him off the stage. YN sipped her drink and predicted that Kirishima would last 8 minutes. Kirishima protested loudly as he jogged down the stairs. Bakugo paused beside her and looked insulted at the prediction. YN explained honestly that he started slow when annoyed. Bakugo clicked his tongue again but did not deny the tendency. The match began with Kirishima charging forward fully hardened like a tank. YN watched while eating her chips as if it were a casual afternoon drama. Bakugo dodged, blasted, and countered, vocalizing his complaints throughout the fight. Kirishima kept charging and shouting encouragements to himself, while Bakugo yelled back and attempted to keep him off balance. Tetsu urged Kirishima to aim for openings, and Kirishima vowed to take Bakugo down quickly, pressing relentless attacks. Bakugo focused on dodging and returning powerful explosions in kind. The fight played out as YN had predicted, a surprisingly long and stubborn clash of explosions versus hardening. In the end, Bakugo's explosive technique secured the victory after an intense exchange, and Kirishima, exhausted from his endurance, was attended by his teammates. Kirishima was praised for his stamina, and Bakugo was acknowledged for his explosive skill. Bakugo had returned from the arena earlier than expected, muttering that he had miscalculated as he pointed at her from the floor. He mouthed that he had started slow, showing his frustration. YN lifted her drink in a small, deadpan toast. The stadium still hummed from the crowd when Bakugo stomped back up the stairs, wiping sweat from his jaw with the back of his hand. His hair was messier than usual from Kirishima's attacks, but the explosive confidence radiating from him remained unmistakable. He dropped into the seat beside YN with a loud thud, arms thrown over the backrest as if claiming the row. Bakugo muttered that it hadn't taken 8 minutes, his tone bitter. YN sipped her drink and said she didn't care. He glared, she did not look up. Present Mike announced the next match, Todoroki Shoto vs Ida Tenya. The crowd erupted as the two stepped into the ring. The match opened with Ida charging forward at full throttle, engine screaming. Todoroki countered with a sweeping wave of ice that YN observed was thinner than usual. He was conserving power. Bakugo grumbled that she was analyzing again. YN replied that she was simply watching. Ida pushed through the frost using Recipro Extend, but YN predicted he would stall out. On cue, Ida stumbled as his engines froze and Todoroki trapped him without hesitation. Todoroki was declared the winner and the crowd roared. YN picked a popcorn kernel from her cup and remarked that it had looked painful. Bakugo scoffed that Ida should have pushed harder. She agreed. Something shifted in the air, then a weight, a focused stare drilling into the side of her face. YN turned slowly and met Bakugo's menacing, teeth-baring grin, the kind that suggested he had been waiting for her to notice. She asked why he was smiling like that. He didn't look away and only intensified the grin, his expression full of anticipation as he told her she was next. YN blinked and remembered the bracket. She was scheduled to face him. She said quietly that she was going to die. Bakugo answered that she absolutely would, but with an excitement that made her uneasy. She sank deeper into her seat and admitted she should have called in sick. Bakugo cracked his knuckles and told her it was too late. The stadium thrummed again as they stepped into the ring. Bakugo cracked his neck and rolled his shoulders like a predator limbering up. YN stood opposite him with a relaxed posture that belied the faint shakiness in her fingers, a leftover tremor from the USJ incident. Her vision was still recovering, slightly blurry and muted, but she lifted her chin and stood her ground. Bakugo warned her not to hold back. She said she was tired. He declared that it was not his problem. The match began. Bakugo launched himself with an explosion under his feet that propelled him forward like a missile. YN moved at the last instant, flickering sideways as her quirk, Null Genesis, pulsed and briefly erased the force of the incoming blast wave. Bakugo's palm skimmed past her cheek, heat searing but missing contact. He noted that she was still fast and spun, firing a chain of explosions like shotgun blasts. YN raised a palm and activated a null field. The blasts bent and muted, but the effort took more from her than she expected. Her legs buckled. Her heartbeat spiked and her stability faltered. She lunged backward, boots skidding across the arena floor. Bakugo hit the ground and launched again, each step detonating force. He sneered that she looked awful. YN shot back that he sounded the same as always. He snorted and moved in with a right hook that detonated with an explosive coating. She ducked barely, feeling the shockwave. He followed with a physical uppercut that her null field could not fully cancel. It landed, snapping her head back and making her stagger. Bakugo observed that she was slower. YN wiped a trickle of blood from her lip and muttered a resigned remark about probably dying. His grin tightened and he said that would teach her to stop underestimating him. He fired a blast into the ground and vanished in smoke. He reappeared behind her and detonated at point-blank range. A blast of heat and force overwhelmed her, blurring her vision. Her quirk flared and negated the lethal edge of the explosion, but not the raw power. She was sent skidding across the arena and crashed into the floor, dust and debris kicking up around her. The crowd gasped. Bakugo stalked toward her and told her she was fighting him, not some weak opponent, and that she should act like it. YN pushed herself up on trembling arms, vision doubling and ringing in her ears. Null Genesis whispered beneath her skin, calming her pulse. Her senses sharpened, and she began to read Bakugo's movements. He blasted at her and she stepped aside. He launched a sweeping explosion and she neutralized it with a wrist flick. He lunged roaring. She caught his wrist mid-blast and the explosion died as if swallowed. His eyes widened and he cursed the quirk under his breath. She twisted and flipped him over her shoulder, sending him crashing onto his back with dust erupting around him. The stadium erupted in noise. Bakugo rolled and sprang back up, his grin almost feral as he shouted encouragement for more. YN's knees buckled. She could barely stay upright. Bakugo's expression shifted as he recognized the lingering effects of USJ in her movements. He noted that she was still shaken from that incident and, after a long inhale, decided to end it quickly. He blasted forward again. YN tried to nullify the hit, but fatigue hit like a sudden weight and her quirk flickered. Bakugo's explosion connected fully. She was lifted off her feet, spun through the air, and slammed into the arena floor with force that echoed through the stadium. Dust settled as she struggled, attempting to push herself up but failing. Her heartbeat raced and her limbs would not respond. Bakugo looked down at her, chest heaving, and told her to stay down. She lifted one arm and tried to stand but could not. Her arm dropped and her eyes closed. Midnight announced that Aizawa YN was unable to continue and that Bakugo Katsuki was the winner. The crowd roared. Bakugo did not raise his arms in victory or shout. He simply stared at her unconscious form and muttered an insult under his breath. He turned away but paused, shoulders tense, and told her to fight him next time only when she was at full strength. Because deep down, behind the fire, the explosions, the rage, he knew. He had not beaten her. He had beaten her injury. That realization angered him more than losing ever could. Chapter 29 The One That Got Away. The room was silent except for the old television humming. Blankets lay over the couch and controllers were scattered across the floor. The faint smell of dust and decay lingered. On the screen, paused mid-fight, YN was falling, wounded, still trying to stand even as her body begged otherwise. Shigaraki replayed the scene for the 20th time. Bakugo's explosion crackled. YN staggered. Null Genesis flickered. She pushed up, then collapsed again. Shigaraki froze as the image of her face hitting the arena floor filled the screen. He stared, jaw tightening, breath unsteady, and muttered that she always did this, that she never knew when to stop. His fingertips dug into his neck until it stung. He hit replay and watched her fall once more. The TV blinked. Static devoured the image. The buttons and remote failed. The screen rippled as if something were crawling through it. A suited silhouette appeared within the static, half of his face hidden. Shigaraki froze and called out to the figure as master. All for One's distorted shape solidified on the screen, his voice channeled through the static. He told Tamura that he had taken quite an interest in her and referred to her as their little escapee. Shigaraki said that he knew who she was. All for One chuckled and asked, in effect, whether he truly knew. As the static cleared, the half-shadowed, half-mechanical face addressed the truth about her origins. Null Genesis had been designed to destroy and recreate, to break down what existed and build anew from the ruins. Shigaraki gripped the controller until it cracked and said that he knew what her quirk did. All for One replied that Tamura only knew the surface. He explained that she was created to follow in his footsteps, made to destroy the old world, made to recreate him if he ever fell, made to kill without hesitation, and if necessary, made to defeat him. The revelation chilled the room. Even Shigaraki forgot to inhale for a moment and whispered his disbelief. All for One then said that YN was their failsafe, their masterpiece, a blade crafted so perfectly that even he might fall to her at full power. He declared her more dangerous than any symbol of peace. Shigaraki, thinking of the girl in the lab who had looked at him with quiet curiosity and confusion, insisted that she was not a weapon or a monster but someone else entirely. All for One countered that she was the biggest threat precisely because she had learned to think, to choose, and to feel. Shigaraki scraped his neck until it stung and shouted for them to stop saying that. All for One told him that she had left them, abandoning her purpose. Shigaraki argued that she had left the lab because she wanted freedom. All for One corrected him, insisting she had left because the heroes had taken her away. The TV flickered, and the image of YN collapsed in the arena, breathing faintly, reappeared. Shigaraki watched for a long, shaking moment and said that she would not stay with them, that she did not belong with heroes. All for One's voice softened dangerously and asked if he wanted her back. Shigaraki swallowed hard and answered yes. Static hummed like a heartbeat. All for One declared, with satisfaction, that they would take her back. The screen shut off and darkness swallowed the room. Tamura sat with his chest tight and fingers trembling, unable to erase the burned image of YN falling, wounded, refusing to break. In the silence, he whispered to the darkness that she had been supposed to stay with him. A sharp gasp tore from YN's throat as she jolted upright beneath the sterile white ceiling of the UA infirmary. Her breath hitched and a throbbing ache pulsed behind her eyes. She winced and pressed a hand to her temple, bewildered and disoriented. Thoughts felt like a jigsaw puzzle missing half its pieces, blurred and jumbled. She blinked hard, trying to clear the fog, but the world only grew brighter and louder, the machines hum harsh in her ears. She reminded herself that it was a short-term memory glitch and tried to stay calm. It had happened before, panicking only made it worse. Her fingers trembled as she brushed hair behind her ear and told herself to think. Her mind offered nothing but static. She scanned the room instead: recovery girl's neat desk, cabinets of first aid supplies, a curtain divider pulled halfway. She had been here many times, too many for a normal student, but familiarity did not bring back the missing moments. Her eyes fell to the fore in her arm and the faint scorch marks on her folded hero costume. Scorch marks and explosions snapped her heartbeat higher. A flicker of Bakugo's grin and the roar of the crowd flashed before her, then nothing. She squeezed her eyes shut as the headache pulsed. Something deeper than the memory loss nagged at her, lodged like splintered glass in her mind: a word, a whisper, a shadow. The feeling slithered down her spine. She fought it, knowing she usually recovered within hours. She steadied her breath and leaned back against the pillow, thinking she should probably wait for recovery girl and rest until things came back. She said it with a quiet certainty born of habit rather than confidence, treating her fractured mind like a stubborn machine that would eventually restart. She closed her eyes and rubbed her forehead as the fog began to thin. Deep in her subconscious, a voice she did not recognize repeated like a broken recording that she had been made to destroy and made to replace. She barely registered a fragment of speech in her half-asleep haze saying she had been made to kill him. The memory slipped away before she could catch it, and the room returned to silence. The faint click of the infirmary door sliding open broke the steady hum of the machines. YN stirred, blinking at the ceiling lights until they softened into focus. The lingering haze in her head pulsed again, familiar and annoying but not alarming. Her short-term memory drawback always took a few hours to settle. Footsteps approached, unhurried and steady. Aizawa Shoyuta stopped beside her bed, his capture cloth swaying lightly. His hair was tied back, and he carried something small and gleaming, her third-place medal. Aizawa remarked that she was awake and that the festival was already over. She had slept through the rest of it. She sat up slowly despite the tug of fatigue and thought her head felt like mush. He explained that her quirk had overworked itself after the match and that she had gone completely limp, adding that she had pushed past her safe limit. He placed the medal gently on the table next to her. She rubbed her temple and relaxed back against the pillow, reassuring herself that she was only foggy and that the haze would lift as it always did. Aizawa pulled a chair closer and told her she was lucky the damage had not been worse. He relayed Recovery Girl's assessment that the memory disruption should fade soon and advised her to take it easy. Her eyes drifted to the medal at her bedside, and she allowed a small, tired smile at the realization that she had actually kept third place. Aizawa told her she had earned it and not to downplay it, commenting that her performance had been strong even with the drawbacks. She lifted the medal by its ribbon and acknowledged that she had done well. Aizawa stood, adjusted his scarf, and instructed her to call for help if she felt dizzy, saying he would be nearby. Before leaving, he looked back and told Yen he was glad she had made it through in one piece and that he was proud of her. The curtain shifted behind him as he left, leaving her alone with the soft rustle of the metal ribbon and the faint warmth of his words lingering longer than expected. She thanked him quietly and, feeling the closeness of the moment, called him Dad. UA's corridors felt different on days off. Without students flooding the hallways and without teachers shouting reminders, the massive school felt more like a sleeping beast. The support wing was the only place still humming with life, metallic vibrations, soft mechanical ticks, and the faint steady buzz of electricity. Most would have found the atmosphere eerie. Yen found it peaceful. She sat on the cold floor of the support lab, legs tucked neatly beneath her, an oversized black hoodie draped comfortably around her. Her hair was loosely tied, strands escaping to tickle her cheeks as she peered at the open device in her lap. Her bandaged eyes were unneeded today. The lab was empty, and she let them breathe. The small sensor unit flickered under her fingers. She pressed her thumb to its cracked core and let a gentle stream of Null Genesis energy pulse through her skin. The device softened, melted into white static for a moment, then reformed cleaner and smoother, wires neatly regenerated into place. She tilted her head and noted that it was better, if not perfect. Everything here was calm and predictable. Machines did not expect her to smile or laugh or respond to emotions she struggled to understand. They did not ask why she was different. They simply existed, and she could fix and remake them with her hands. She reached for the next damaged component when distant voices drifted down the hallway. She paused, not from curiosity but because noise in this wing on a day off was unusual. Present Mick's typically cheerful tone was noticeably toned down and almost grim. Another staff member responded with a heavy sigh. Yen did not move or look up, but her hearing sharpened and her quirk hummed faintly in her chest. The teachers said his spine had taken serious damage and that Hero Killer Stain had nearly ended Ingenium's hero career in a fierce encounter. The words made her fingers still on the screwdriver, knuckles tightening. The conversation included the concern that Recovery Girl could not fix injuries like that. Those words tightened something in her that she rarely let surface. No one could fix injuries like that except her, and only at a terrible cost. Null Genesis could reconstruct anything she erased, but the USJ incident had proven the danger of pushing too far. She had overexerted herself healing Aizawa and the world had gone white, her consciousness fracturing. Her memory still had holes, some small and some frighteningly large. Healing someone as gravely wounded as Tensei would drain everything she had left. She might lose her sight permanently, might lose pieces of her identity, or might not wake up again. The teachers' voices continued down the hallway, mentioning that Tenya had not taken the news well and that Ingenium had always been his inspiration. They hoped the boy would not do anything reckless. Yen lowered her gaze, thinking that she understood reckless all too well and that if she were in Tenya's place, she might be driven to the same dangerous choices. Her hand trembled, a rare and subtle sign, and a spark jumped from the half-repaired device. She hissed softly and shook her stinging fingers, unwilling to indulge the thought of doing anything that reckless. She did not want to consider healing Tensei, did not want to weigh the risk or recall the fear of waking up blind and disoriented in the infirmary. The voices faded, leaving only the steady hum of machinery. The silence that settled over the lab felt heavier than before. She exhaled and leaned back against the wall, curling her knees and resting her chin on them as she stared at the scattered tools and half-finished tech on the floor. She thought that ingenium mattered to Tenya and reflected on her quirk, its limits, and the consequences of pushing beyond them. She knew she could not attempt something like that alone and that Aizawa would stop her. Or worse, people might look at her with fear. Still, she could not ignore the ache twisting inside her. She was not good at comfort, at words, at being human. Maybe she did not need to be. Maybe being present was enough. The thought was oddly grounding. She pushed herself up, brushed dust off her hoodie, and stretched until her back popped. She glanced at the monitor she had been repairing and told it she would finish later. Her voice was soft and monotone as always, but the tension in her chest said otherwise. She left the support lab quietly, the humming machines fading behind her as she walked the empty corridor. She was alone, thoughtful and aloof, but Tenya Ida unexpectedly weighed on her mind. She carried the quiet, unsettling truth that with a quirk capable of creation and destruction, she might be the one person who could save a fallen hero or destroy herself trying. A chorus of alarm erupted in the faculty lounge and the room descended into chaos. Several teachers stood as papers fluttered to the floor. YN froze mid-step, confusion crossing her face as every adult stared at her like she had suggested something reckless. Power Loader was the first to recover and objected that she could not rush to the hospital and use her quirk on Tensei Ida's injuries. Recovery Girl tapped her cane and forbade any such thing, warning that using her quirk on trauma of that scale was beyond her training. She explained that Tensei's injuries resulted from high-impact combat and that intervening without proper oversight could overload YN or worsen the situation. YN tried to respond, but Aizawa spoke with his usual dry bluntness that even supervised use was too dangerous because her quirk output fluctuated under stress and she did not yet have full control. He warned that if she pushed herself she could collapse or cause worse harm. YN clenched her jaw and admitted to herself that she hated feeling powerless. Present Mike gently reminded her that she was not to blame for not being there, and the room quieted. Even Aizawa's expression softened when her shoulders sagged beneath her frustration. Midnight moved closer and patted her head while reminding her that caring did not give her the right to gamble with her life or someone else's recovery. YN curled her fingers into fists and lowered her gaze, breathing slowly to steady the storm inside. She was not reckless. She could not stand doing nothing while someone she loved was in pain. Aizawa stepped closer and lowered his voice to tell her that if she wanted to help she needed to get stronger, gain control of her quirk, and learn first aid, medical theory, and rescue protocols. He reminded her that she was a student and should start there. Her chest tightened, but the feeling shifted from guilt to determination. She looked up and agreed that she understood. Recovery Girl nodded in approval, Power Loader breathed with relief, and Aizawa raised a brow as if to mark her progress. As the faculty returned to their duties, YN moved toward the hallway. The tightness in her throat remained but had become resolve. If she could not help Tensei now, she would train until she could. Aizawa watched her leave and muttered that she was problem child number 4. Power Loader noted that the determined ones often turned out well. Aizawa sighed as he gathered his paperwork and reflected that that was the life of heroes. It was a rainy morning. YN watched Ojiro's wagging tail while he chatted excitedly with Shoji. Ojiro complained about so many stairs and feeling embarrassed. YN offered a deadpan observation about a floating cloth. Others echoed similar sentiments. Siro sulked about being told he made a good effort, and Su and YN spoke in unison, making Siro groan. Aizawa entered and the class stilled. He announced that today's hero informatics class would feature a special assignment. The students would come up with their hero aliases. The class erupted with excitement and cheering, everyone except YN, who melted into her seat and covered her ears. Bakugo's yelling made it worse until Mizo extended his limbs to shield her ears. Aizawa explained how hero picks worked and displayed a chart showing how many hero picks each student had. The numbers put some students in a completely different league. Todoroki had 4,123 picks, Bakugo 3,456, Aizawa 2,316, Tokoyami 360, Ida 301, Kaminari 272, Yaoyorozu 108, Kirishima 68, Uraraka 20, and Siro 14. Kaminari complained that the pros were in a different league. Aoyama grumbled that the pros had no eyes for fashion. Kirishima muttered that something seemed off about the rankings, folding his arms as he watched the presentation. Siro made a remark about pros getting nervous when a winner appeared chained to a stand. Kirishima leaned closer and said the chained presentation looked like a dramatic villain in a movie display, something meant to intimidate. YN blinked and realized that the chains and aggressive showmanship explained the noise and hostility she'd noticed earlier. Bakugo snapped at them to stop staring, and Siro teased him, suggesting he was posing for the cameras or auditioning for trouble. Kirishima laughed and pointed out that they had not trusted Bakugo with freedom on stage, which seemed extreme. Bakugo retorted angrily, but YN, calm and sharp, observed that he should have smiled because the chains had damaged his public image. Bakugo sputtered, and Siro joked about the merchandising possibilities, bringing the class to laughter. Kirishima wiped his eyes from laughing. Bakugo growled, sparks snapping at his palms as he threatened to blow everyone up. YN did not move. She watched him with a detached, unreadable stare and noted that a photo would have been useful. Siro and Kirishima erupted in laughter. Midnight entered the room and reminded them that the names they picked now could be what the world called them. She warned that she would be assessing their choices. Bakugo reached for his sleeping bag and continued talking as he settled in. YN stared at the blank whiteboard Midnight had set up. YN leaned back in her chair, chin resting on her palm as the boards began to slam down one by one. Yuga's suggestion flashed first as an overly dramatic option. YN dismissed it as not really a name and asked for something shorter and less essay-like. When Midnight reworked it, YN approved the shorter version. Mina shouted her suggestion with enthusiasm. YN warned that the name would draw unwanted attention from certain franchises but admitted it was cool. Midnight rejected it and Mina pouted. Tsu presented a name she had used since elementary school. YN approved it as fitting, memorable, and practical. Kirishima slammed his board down with his chosen name. YN nodded, calling it solid and trustworthy. Jiro's choice was noted as straightforward and effective branding. Shoji's name showed he had not overthought it, which YN respected. Siro's pick earned an amused reaction from YN for being oddly clever. Ojiro's name was taken at face value, and YN commented on its literalness. Sato teased Ojiro for copying. YN admitted she was suddenly hungry, which broke the tension. Ashido's enthusiastic choice was predicted to stick. Kaminari's name finally sounded heroic rather than like a warning label, YN observed. Hagakure's honest choice was remarked on as blunt. Momo's selection felt elegant, strong, and professional to YN. Todoroki opted to use his given name. YN called it a bold choice and praised the confidence it showed. Tokoyami's suggestion sounded legendary or ominous, which YN liked. Mineta's idea was flatly rejected by YN. Koda's gentle name softened YN immediately. Then Bakugo's board was slammed down with the suggestion that caused the room to freeze. YN turned slowly and said calmly that it was not a hero name but more like a police report headline. Finally, Achiko's choice was described by YN as cute, clever, and easy to cheer for. She leaned back again, folding her arms and staring at the still empty whiteboard. Midnight noted that only Bakugo's revision and Ida, then Midoriya and Aizawa, remained. Ida presented his board with tense formality and used his own name. YN remarked on the straightforward choice. Midoriya, after some hesitation, revealed that he had accepted the nickname Deku as his hero name because someone had helped him see it in a new light, and the class settled when he sat back down. Midnight tapped her whip lightly against the floor and pointed out that one person was still missing a name. YN rose deliberately and walked to the front with her board at her side. She announced that the name she had chosen was not meant to sound impressive and revealed nullification hero, Nulla. The room fell silent. Midnight inhaled slowly and called it dangerous in a satisfied tone. YN explained that it meant absence, the thing left behind when she was done, and a murmur ran through the class. Kaminari admitted it was a little scary. Kirishima described it as manly in a warning way. Bakugo scoffed, but YN met his glare without flinching. Midnight praised the name as clear to both villains and civilians. YN returned to her seat with her expression unchanged, leaving the name Nulla lingering in the air. Quiet, restrained, absolute. Later, on the UA rooftop, YN sat near the low concrete wall with internship offers spread neatly across her lap. She slid several sheets aside, deciding that one agency was not for her and then another was also unsuitable. She exhaled and scanned the skyline in thought. A student accidentally emerged from the wall beside her in a clearly flustered state and quickly apologized for the intrusion. The student identified himself as Mirio Togata, a third year, and explained that his quirk sometimes caused awkward moments when he did not plan ahead. He admitted he had not meant to intrude and claimed he had only glimpsed headers on YN's papers. He suggested that Sir Nitai's agency would suit her, praising its training in precision, foresight, and DSPLN and arguing that it matched her instincts. Y North kept her papers close and reminded him that he had been an accidental intruder. Mirio defended himself, noting that he had only seen enough to know the offers looked serious. YN considered the suggestion and said she would think about the Night Eye offer. Mirio brightened and admitted that was all he had hoped for. As YN stood and tucked the papers away, she told him to announce himself before entering unexpectedly in the future. Mirio laughed, mortified, and promised to learn his lesson. He watched her leave the rooftop and murmured that Night Eye would be a very good match for her if she chose that agency.